It needs to be on. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we definitely need to make a start. So those at the back, please find a seat. Diana, Nicholas, welcome. Winston. Tom, are you staying there? You're not on for a while. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the UK. For those that have travelled, welcome to London. Thanks for bringing the weather for those from warmer climes. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event, Building the Sustainable Future, Pathways to Low Carbon Cement and Concrete. I'm aware it's an early start, so for those in the room, thanks so much for battling London transport in this unspeakable weather. I am Paul Adelecki. I'm the Strategy Director, Communications Director, Policy Director for the GCCA. The first job, though, is to thank our partners, to thank Breakthrough Agenda, to thank Concrete Transition Capital, Leadership Group for Industry, or LEAD IT as they're called, Mission Impossible Partnership, Mission Possible Partnership, possible partnership, the transition is possible. And Concrete, and who are also the lead on the Industrial Transition Accelerator. It's great to be in London for Climate Week. We're based in London, the GCCA, but this is the first time we've actually wanted to do an event, and we always do think these things with no half measures. Let's do a small event. Let's make it a couple of hours. No, let's make it 3 hours. 4 hours we have of a programme with experts, exceptional speakers, and it's all about progress. The progress the industry is making with our partners, but also the progress that we need to make and to have an honest conversation about what is stopping greater and quicker progress. We have some great brains within this room. We know that technology is there, it's available, but we need the credible policies, we need the market infrastructure, not only in the global north, but also in the global south as well. So we're going to be discussing policy, technology, finance, innovation, as well as launching our open challenge towards the end of the event. So, without further ado, the agenda is busy. It's my great pleasure to welcome on stage the CEO of the GCCA, Thomas Guillot, a great friend, a passionate leader on sustainability, to give a formal welcome. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. Applaud you. I was applauding Paul. I mean, I understand that now we are friends. So, I mean, that's really, thank you for that. Finally. Is there something to move the slide on, or you got it? Okay. Good. So that's you, that's me. That's a few remarks on. So I do that. No, okay. So I do that. See. Okay, that's me. How to say? Next one. First. Yeah, let me tell you a few words on GCCA. So, again, I mean, I extend the very warm welcome from Paul. It's a pleasure to be here. I am more of a heat guy, so I'm actually quite happy with the weather. Very comfortable at 30 degrees. Let's see at 40. It's really a pleasure to be here. And as you said, I mean, usually we have this type of event in New York, during the New York Climate Week. And it's really light, actually, to move the continent and to be here in London. And I really thanks all our friends that are usually with us in New York, actually sitting here today and coming into the British capital. So a few words on GCCA, as I said. I mean, GCCA, for those of you that do not know us, I mean, it's really the biggest global cement industry organization. We represent about 50% of the world of cement and concrete. And we have really members from everywhere in the world. So, I mean, from China, hello Tongbo, the most important companies there. We have also in Latin America, in Europe, of course, in Africa, in Southeast Asia. And everywhere we have big and small companies moved by the common intention, desire, commitment to go to net zero and to do everything it needs to be done to get there. But there are a number of things that needs to change, and we're going to come back on that. We cannot do it alone, hence the collaboration, hence the cooperation. I think that's a motto that was repeated a number of times by the industry over and over. And as such, we are also working actually with the National Cement Association, and we have here Adam from Canada. And I think it's a good illustration of the way we work and we articulate the work. I mean, we cannot move everything at global level. This is ridiculous, right? Concrete is a local industry and will always remain a local industry. The question is how we can potentialize, leverage, catalyze the work so that we make life easier for the people locally, and that we find synergies, a little bit like this, multinational, find synergies between the different continents, the different experience, and make sure that we are moving on the same pace. And we have a few initiatives that I will come back on that will help that. If you go to the next slide, we are also working with actually the value chain. So this was an innovation or an extension from last year. We launched the value chain partnership, engaging actually equipment manufacturer, solution provider, to work with us on these things. I mean, when we talk about deployment of capital, a lot of it comes with new technology, new definition, and we felt the need to engage these people, be it admixture people, be it, again, a solution provider. So thank you for the guys that are here, and it's a big range from Sinoma to ABB to Master Builder, etc. Now, what we are doing, and how we actually, moving the GCCA along the three strategic priorities. First one is innovation. So we are an innovative organization. About 40% of our work in terms of time and budget is dedicated to innovation. I mean, we'll present that today for the launch of the Open Challenge. It's a very big chapter of us. Then we are also, working very much on all what is decarbonization and sustainability. This is the reason that we are here, in part, London Climate Week, explaining how the cement sector, how the concrete sector can actually make it happen, and what are the needs on building this discussion. Last but not least is also positioning concrete as a material of choice, right? We have, and we believe that concrete is part of the solutions. It is an essential material. I'm not going to extend on that. I mean, you have seen many presentations where we say that. Second most material used by man after water. So it is a very fundamental product on the product that is not just a usual casual thing. It is needed for the development of the world and for the development of the global south in particular. Hence, we need to find solutions on decarbonizing that. And we are working with our people on advocacy, knowledge sharing, on finance. We can move on that. So you have a roadmap. I mean, this was launched at the COP of Glasgow, presenting the 7 levels and presenting the way we can actually decarbonize our industry, and that was a very important development. Again, if you go to the next slide, how do we work that and how do we make it happen? It's basically in the cooperation with the national organization, working at national level, how locally they can appropriate themselves the technologies. What is their plan? What is their program? I always say that we are a long cycle industry. Hence, if you don't have a strategy, you cannot progress. I mean, if it's not in your strategic plan, for sure, it's not part of your next investment cycle. So this is very important to do. Now, progress, as you said, thank you for the next slide. We are making progress, 25% carbon intensity reduction versus 1990. These are the 2023 figures. It is progress. Is it enough? Probably not. There is a need to accelerate. Everybody is mindful of that. It's not only cement specific, it's basically all the world. We are late with the 1.5, I think we all know it. Now the question is how this work, and how can we make it happen? If you go to the next slide, you have it. We have actually 5 essential policy requirements. These are things, these are enablers, these are things that needs to be developed if we want to progress and if we want progress to be sustainable. The transition to make it possible needs also to be profitable. Big investment will not come if we are not in a profitable world. If when you invest in a green solutions, this green solution doesn't have a payback, doesn't have a return on investment, this will not fly. As simple as that, we are all aware of that. So we have 5 essential areas: the availability of the supplementary cementitious material, the reduction, the low carbon procurement, make sure that you actually prioritize the lower carbon model in your procurement system, the waste and the circularity, carbon pricing, and of course carbon capture wherever this makes sense and wherever this can be implemented. That's the last slide, I think. So Paul, I leave you the floor for the rest of the morning. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Tom. The great thing about London Climate Week, New York Climate Week, or all the regional climate weeks is they're a bit informal and you can make mistakes, especially on a Monday morning. I didn't go through the agenda slide, so let's go back. I won't bore you with it, but it's important that you have a little peek at that, just to show some of the timings that we have to go through. So we're gonna have formal opening remarks in a moment as well, talking a little bit about the collaboration between government and industry. Then our first panel at 9:25, looking at scaling up demand, moving then on to remarks around the built environment. And then our panel 2 is all around emerging markets, making sure that the solutions are not only in the global north, but translatable to the global south as well. Then we definitely will have a coffee break. Will it be half an hour? Let's see how we get on. And then our third panel is all around innovation, technology, and financing that to really scale up. And then we will formally launch our open challenge. That's the agenda for the day. So you've heard opening remarks from Thomas. We now want to talk a little bit about collaboration between industry and between government. Cement and concrete are global materials, and we really see where there is that effective partnership between government and industry, genuine progress can be made. And really to give some reflections on that and to provide the sort of second set of opening remarks, it's my great pleasure to introduce His Excellency Robert Fry on behalf of Canada as the co-chairs of the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough. Now, Robert is the Deputy High Commissioner for Canada in the UK, and the floor is yours. Welcome.
Anyway, good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome to London. I can tell you it's not normally this hot here in London. I'm the Deputy High Commissioner here. I'm based at Canada House in Trafalgar Square, which you can't really miss because it's surrounded by Canadian flags right now, and one Ukrainian flag as well. It's a real honor for me to be here today and represent the Government of Canada, as was said, as co-chair of the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough, alongside key partners from across the global cement and concrete sector. In our shared efforts to address climate realities as we seek to bolster productivity and innovation on a global scale. And I'd like to introduce some of our delegation here. So we have, if you are looking to talk to some of the members of the Canadian delegation in Canada, we have Dominique, Megan, Cynthiana, and we have Adam here representing the association as well in Canada. But I know there are other Canadian associations and companies here. And we take this really seriously. You can tell by the size of our delegation how much effort and resources and how much importance we put into this. Concrete is an indispensable product to the global economy. As the second most consumed product on Earth, cement and concrete production has a significant global impact. And I know you all know that in this room. But even modest improvements in emissions intensities can result in substantial reductions at global levels. At the same time, we are facing a growing challenge. How do we meet the increasing demand for cement while also reducing emissions? Pour relever ce défi, je vais parler un peu en français pour mes collègues, mon collègue Thomas ici. Pour relever ce défi, nous devons accélérer nos efforts visant à déployer les solutions à faible émission de carbone déjà existantes et à faire progresser de nouvelles approches novatrices. Canada is ready to face this challenge. Canadian producers and innovators are working so we can deploy cutting-edge solutions to reduce emissions across the sector at home and abroad. We see this as a growing and important opportunity. It is in this context that the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough, which was launched 3 years ago at COP28, with a clear and ambitious goal to make low and near zero emission cement the preferred choice in global markets, with efficient use and near zero emissions, production established and growing in every region by 2030. Currently, the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough is supported by 11 key initiatives and 14 country members, many in this room, including its esteemed upcoming COP presidents Turkey and Ethiopia. This initiative has brought forward knowledge on decarbonization from various experts. It has hosted discussions on topics such as market acceptance of low-carbon cement and concrete, and enhancing circularity through alternative fuels and raw materials. It has also showcased success stories and shed a light on best practices across the industry, all of which we have helped inform national approaches and accelerate action. So I'd like to thank all our members for their continued dedication and work. Je souhaite remercier tous nos membres pour leur dévouement constant et l'excellent travail qu'ils accomplissent. Our collective progress has not gone unnoticed. At COP30, and we were just talking about that, under the leadership of Brazil's presidency, the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough, together with valued partners and the Global Cement and Concrete Association, was invited to steer the only plan within the COP process dedicated specifically to cement and concrete decarbonization. I know that this plan to accelerate solutions now serves as your work plan, to accelerate the implementation of critical steps until the next global stocktake in 2028, giving us a clear 3-year horizon for action. This achievement reflects a truly collaborative effort, and I'd like to recognize and thank you, enabling partners, the GCCA, the partner organizations including UNIDO, the International Energy Agency, and the Industrial Decarbonization Initiative, amongst others, for their invaluable contributions. The GCCA, in particular, has played a critical leadership role in advancing the industry toward net zero. As a standard bearer, it has helped build momentum and elevate this issue at the highest levels, including through events like the one here today. And I know you had to move your event here, given some of the global issues going on right now. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to our country members and enabling initiatives, both those here today and those supporting us from afar, whose commitment continues to drive this initiative forward. In particular, I would like to acknowledge the important role of our co-chair, the United Arab Emirates, who have produced tremendous support since the launch of the breakthrough. Net zero cement and concrete is an ambitious goal, but it's also an essential one. Canada remains committed to sharing our innovations and strengthening our collective action toward decarbonizing the cement and concrete sector at home and abroad. And we will continue to work together with member countries, industry partners here today, and the dedicated organizations to advance this work. We will continue to work with and welcome new partners and encourage all interested countries and initiatives to join the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough, so please join, regardless of where you are, where they are in the decarbonization journey. A diverse range of perspectives and expertise is really key to unlocking global solutions. Together, we are building a stronger and more impactful cement and concrete breakthrough and advancing meaningful progress toward a net zero future. So thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you for having me. And please don't hesitate to join up. And let's do this together. Let's make this work together. Alors, merci d'être ici avec nous aujourd'hui. Je vous souhaite un excellent événement et une excellente journée en dépit de la chaleur. Alors, merci tout le monde.
Well, an excellent start and great words from His Excellency there. Thanks again. So we've heard from government in terms of the importance of driving the agenda. We now want to hear from industry and hear what's going on in Canada as an example in terms of driving that. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our colleague, our friend, Adam Auer, who is president of the Canadian Cement Association. Adam, over to you.
Thank you, Deputy High Commissioner, and thank you, Thomas, and the entire GCCA team for convening today's event. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues from the Government of Canada who as co-chair of the Cement Breakthrough and one of the partners in today's event, are showcasing a commitment to the kind of collaboration and government leadership our industry needs more of. I don't think there's any need to belabor the obvious observation that the world has undergone a rather rapid geopolitical shift, and that by some measures, the climate conversation looks to have all but disappeared. But I want to state from the outset, the cement and concrete industry's commitment to decarbonization has not wavered. Not because we're indifferent to political headwinds, but because we've never understood decarbonization solely as a climate obligation. Decarbonization is fundamentally productivity and modernization by another name, and that means it's a business imperative. But in Canada, like many places, the struggle to align acute economic political pressures with a strategic approach to the energy transition is very real. There's genuine political energy around building infrastructure, housing, and industrial capacity, and cement and concrete are not peripheral to that agenda. Cement and concrete are as strategic to the global economy as energy. There is no housing, no infrastructure, no defense project, no energy installation that does not depend on a secure supply of cement. Maintaining a competitive, modern, and increasingly clean supply is not simply good industrial policy, it's a matter of economic security and sovereignty. If we get the policy conditions right, we can ensure that investment drives demand for lower carbon concrete and accelerates the modernization of the plants that produce it, aligning our economic and infrastructure agenda with our climate objectives. At home, I advocate passionately that a strong domestic supply of cement is a matter of national sovereignty. But the truth is that decarbonizing cement and concrete is too complex, too capital intensive, and too technically demanding for any one country to solve on its own. The technologies we need are being developed across multiple continents. The standards frameworks that validate the performance of low carbon products are built through diligent multilateral work, and the knowledge base on novel cements, on carbon capture, on performance-based specifications is a global commons. The GCCA has played a central role in building that common foundation, aligning our global industry around a shared decarbonization pathway. Initiatives like the Cement Breakthrough, the Cement and Concrete Breakthrough demonstrate that governments understand they have a leadership role to play too, not just in setting domestic policy, but in creating the international conditions for this transition to happen at scale. At home and abroad, Canada has tried to do its part, and so let me share briefly what I think we've gotten right and where we still have work to do. First, in 2022, the Canadian cement and concrete industry and the Government of Canada did something I believe is genuinely innovative. We co-developed a roadmap to net zero carbon concrete by 2050. Not a government plan handed to industry, nor an industry wish list handed to government, but a real working partnership that brought together producers, technology companies, environmental organizations, and multiple federal departments to map a credible path to net zero across the full cement and concrete value chain. The roadmap reflects something I believe very deeply, that the right policy levers, green procurement, performance-based codes and standards, industrial carbon pricing, are not just climate tools, they're competitiveness tools. They drive investment, they drive modernization, and they create the demand signals that justify capital allocation decisions at the plant level. Just 3 days ago, I was in Saint-Constant, Quebec, for a groundbreaking ceremony. AmRise, which for those of you who don't know is the new name for Lafarge Holcim interests in North America, is investing more than $610 million to modernize their facility. It's the largest single cement plant modernization in Canada in decades, and it will be the first cement plant in Canada designed from the ground up to be net zero ready. It was made possible by climate funding from both the federal government and the government of Quebec, and by a carbon market in Quebec that has provided the kind of long-term price signal that moves investment decisions. It's an example of policy working as intended. But there are gaps in our current approach that threaten our trajectory. First, policy certainty. In Canada, we operate under 6 separate carbon pricing systems, each with different rules that have changed multiple times over the past decade, creating unstable and unpredictable markets. The durability of these systems is a constant political football, and it hurts the investment case. We've also recently seen a collapse of climate-focused investment programs and a migration towards tax-based investment supports that don't always align with cement and concrete sector needs. The second major gap is market adoption. Industry is invested in lower carbon cements and alternative fuels and CCUS. We'll hear all about the technologies today, as well as environmental product declarations and the full apparatus of market transparency. The supply side initiative is there, but demand side adoption has lagged. Performance concerns, real or perceived, as well as a lack of regulatory incentives weigh on the willingness of the construction sector to adopt new cements and new concrete mix designs. Green procurement commitments are among the most powerful demand signals we have, and while the Government of Canada has made commendable progress with its standard on embodied carbon in construction, these policies need durability, consistent enforcement, and scale to move the market. We also need stronger codes and standards, clear performance-based specifications, accelerated testing and standardization pathways, and procurement frameworks that create low-risk environments to demonstrate and validate new products. We need architecture, engineering, and construction community to see low-carbon concrete not as a compromise, but as a high-value solution to multifaceted performance needs in the built environment. The panels you'll hear from today speak directly to these challenges, from the demand signals and policy levers that drive market adoption, to the financing and innovation gap between the pilot stage and commercial deployment. These are the critical questions our sector is wrestling with, and I look forward to participating in the discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Robert. And thank you for your leadership in Canada. You know, the GCCA, one of our prime jobs is simply sharing good case studies, good examples of where things work and showing that around the world. And so it's great to be able to sort of shine a light on what's going on in Canada. So thank you. So we're going to slightly change the pace now, getting into our first discussion, our panel on scaling demand for low-carbon cement and concrete. Enablers and challenges. We all know that demand signals can accelerate decarbonisation and the key investments. And so we want to share some success stories, but also how we can overcome some of the barriers to that. So I'm going to pass the floor to the moderator. I'm delighted to introduce one of our partners, Lead IT, to lead the moderation for this panel. So it's my great pleasure to introduce, ladies and gentlemen, Philippe Sanchez, who is Senior Fellow at Lead IT. Philippe.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Paul, and a good morning to everyone, and welcome to this panel on scaling demand for low-carbon cement and concrete. I'll spare you the words on how indispensable cement and concrete is, because it's already been said, but what I will say is that the cement and concrete sector has made real progress on decarbonisation, and the technology to go further is increasingly available, but deployment must be accelerated. And the central challenge today is creating markets that actually reward lower carbon products. Demand-side measures like public procurement, procurement policy, standards, and customer leadership are critical to unlocking investment at scale. And that is what we're here today to explore in this session: what is working, what is not, and where do we need change. My name is Felipe Sanchez, I'll be your moderator, and I wanted to invite my fellow panelists here. I'd be delighted to welcome 4 panelists that bring a genuinely different vantage point across the value chain. So I welcome Emma Wiklund, Innovation Lead at Skanska, Olivia Absalom, Deputy Director, Business and International Transformation at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, Annika Ramsköld, the Vice President of Sustainability at Vattenfall, and Winston Beck, Vice President, Global Policy Affairs at Heidelberg Materials. Now, before we get into the discussion, I just wanted to emphasize the framing for this session. Where are we today in creating demand for low-carbon cement and concrete, and what needs to change to move from ambition to real market transformation? And we'll have a few rounds of questions with our panelists before we open up to the floor for questions. So let's kick off. And my notes are in the wrong order. So Winston, I wanted to start with you. Heidelberg Materials is at the forefront of decarbonization investments, including on CCUS. And you have lighthouse projects in Norway, in Canada, in the UK. Those are three different policy and market environments. So what has Heidelberg Materials learned from working across these jurisdictions on the barriers and incentives for low-carbon cement?
Yes, thank you, Philip. And thanks to all the organizers for this event. I think it's a great kickoff to a long week of meetings at 35 degrees. First of all, I think it's important to understand, and I think Thomas alluded to it in his beginning, that cement production is not as simple as some people think. And it's important that, to understand that 30% of our emissions are coming from the energy side, but 70% of the emissions are coming from the chemistry of our production process. And that means that we don't have one single technology which can get us to net zero, but we need really a mix of solutions and a mix of technologies. And also these technologies and solutions depend on where we are producing. So Heidelberg Materials is present in 52 markets. We are a global cement and concrete producer. Clinker production is actually our USP. We are in all continents except for Latin America. And solutions which maybe today work in Europe and Northern America may not yet work in emerging countries like in Africa. Now, so that means that we need to look at a range of technologies. As I mentioned, we are looking at alternative fuels. We are looking at novel binders and SCMs like calcined clay, for example, which is a great solution, for example, for Africa, where you don't have limestone available, but you have a lot of clay. And now calcined clay is also becoming quite popular in Europe and Northern America. We are looking at process optimization, of course. And last and not least, we are looking at carbon capture, storage, and utilization, because that is the only technology to date which can get us to a net zero due to our high amount of unavoidable process emissions, which I mentioned before. And of course, that's a capex intensive and a complex technology, because we need to install a capture facility at our site. At the same time, we need to develop the transport and we need to develop the storage or the utilization applications. And that means that we need to develop value chains which have never existed before. We need to work with partners which we have never worked with before. And we need to make sure that we have the enabling conditions in the regions where we develop these projects. Now, you mentioned Norway, UK, and Canada. And indeed, in Norway, we are actually the first cement company in the world which has a CCS plant industry scale in operation. So since June last year, we capture and store up to 400,000 tons of CO2 per year. We are currently in the ramp-up phase, but since a few months, the facility actually is at, I think, more or less the maximum of what it can technically capture. And the great news is that it works very well. We are very happy with the process. And due to this facility, we are now offering near-zero cement on the market, which is the first of its kind. In the UK, we also have reached an FID for a full-scale CCS facility in Padeswood, Wales, which is part of the HyNet cluster, and that project really came together because of the great support of the UK government. And also in Canada, we are looking still at CCS for our Edmonton plant in Alberta. I think there are still a few steps to go, like the carbon pricing credit scheme is something which needs to further develop, but we are working very intensely also with the Canadian government on making that work. So to answer your question, what we are looking at is incentive schemes. We are looking at the availability of the infrastructure, meaning CO2 transport, storage, and electricity. And we are looking, of course, at public acceptance and customer demand. And indeed, the collaborations with our customers and the collaboration with governments was key to get there.
And I'm glad you raised the point about finding those new partnerships, because I want to come back to that in the second round. But before I do, I want to come to Emma and say that Skanska sits on the other side of that equation. You are a major construction company and a significant buyer of low-carbon materials. So for you, what does the market need from cement producers to accelerate the procurement of low-carbon solutions? And what would it help to move from individual demo projects like the ones that Winston has mentioned to making low carbon the default choice across construction?
Yes, so thank you for having me here. So for us, I don't know if we have a direct need, especially from the cement industry. It's more that we need to do this together. We need to work jointly. It's about policies and standards. We've heard that before in this opening of this day. For us in construction industry, it's super important, one, that we can use the products, of course, that it's in the standards, it's allowed. We really prefer everything being done that can be done to decarbonize the materials before we go to CCS, just as you say, Winston. And the second thing is that the value needs to come to the end customer. So for us in construction industry, most of the times when we do build things, we build it for someone else with someone else's money, and the value needs to follow the whole way through to the end customer. And today in construction industry, we use EPDs to measure this from a carbon perspective. So if the carbon reduction or the capture cannot follow the whole way and benefit the end customer in a way so it can be reported, the value is less. So that is one thing that I see today that is lacking, that we cannot transfer everything good that happens along the value chain down to the end customer in a reporting perspective. So Greenhouse Gas Protocol is working on that. We have an update coming. Hopefully that will allow for the reporting and calculations to be made. We saw the new draft of the SBTI version that opens up or starts talking about this. So hopefully that is something good that can accelerate. And then my third point is that we need to use what we have. So Skanska has launched a report, the Procurement for Impact report, for making EU more competitive, because we think that a good thing is to use the tools and the strength that we already have. So mandating sustainability, resilience, and low carbon criteria in public procurement would really make a difference for us in the construction industry. That would accelerate the use of low carbon products and the acceptance for low carbon products in the construction industry.
And it's good seeing Olivia nodding there right next to you. But I'll come to you in a second, Olivia. Before, I wanted to come to Annika. So Annika, Vattenfall occupies a distinct position. You are a utility, you are a partner to green materials manufacturers, you're also an end customer of some of these green products. And that gives you a sight of multiple parts of the value chain at the same time. So what insights has that given you regarding how the demand for low carbon materials is evolving?
Well, as we already heard, I think the key thing is that we all need to work in an ecosystem and you have the full value chain. So it means that the only way to get all the way is that every link in the value chain is there, because if one link is missing, then the whole chain breaks. And it means that it's, first of all, I would say one of the key learnings is it's not an easy path to get all this in place. And it means that you need to have all the actors there. You have to have the political support. You have to have the buyers requiring. You need to have all the actors putting the material there. And that means that we act in a completely different way. Also internally, earlier, now you need to have R&D working together with procurement, working together with other specialists. But I think the key thing is, therefore, that we work in completely new ways, meaning that we need to trust each other differently. And I think it's also very delicate. I think the initial discussions, and I see Winston is nodding, because what happens is that when you now sit at the same table as your supplier, your sub-supplier, your sub-sub-suppliers, the transparency around where you have the margins, the risks, the cost, etc., are emerging. And that is painful when you're used to setting your own agenda. Now it means that everyone needs to share the risks, share the investments, share the premium, share the knowledge. And that takes a lot of trust building. And it's not easy. So I think that's one of the key learnings, and I think we've come quite a long way, but that also means that we need to work in partnerships, because otherwise you don't build this trust. And if I take examples on how how you can start working with it. We have, like you said, for a long time, for Vattenfall, we are providing the fossil-free electrons at one end of the system to, for instance, support Winston when you want to have the fossil-free electricity into your plant. And then at the other end, we are a buyer of concrete and other materials, of course, when we are to build the fossil-free production that is then going to be in the beginning. What we learned already early is that even if we put demands on fossil-free materials, very often when you ask that for a supplier, the supplier would say, sorry, we don't have access to that one. Or the OEM supplier says, no, we don't have it. And then we said, but we know there is something there, and we can put you together with someone else at the table. But that was difficult in the beginning. And that's also why we went from not only providing electricity, but also going into different partnerships. So we had the joint venture to produce fossil-free steel together with SSAB and LKAB. We are working with a number of cement suppliers and startups and others also to see how can we bring these materials quicker to the market or transport. But there are so many actors in between in the value chain, and that's what we need to get to. So trust and transparency to the extent possible, while still, of course, keeping the integrity for each actor in the value chain. That's what we need to work with.
And that's not an easy task, building that ecosystem.
Definitely not an easy task, but that's the only way forward.
Absolutely. And Olivia, so I wanted to come to you. You've heard from 3 companies now. You've heard Winston mention carbon pricing. Emma mentioned public procurement. So, I mean, what are your reflections of what we've heard so far from the 3 companies? And what role can government play, in your view, in creating demand?
Thank you. Yeah, so first, I suppose on reflections of what we've heard this morning and from panel members, you mentioned there, I'm nodding along because it just feels like there's a lot of agreement about the challenges and what we need to do to overcome them. And so maybe that will help some way to get to that trust and the partnerships that need to develop. The other reflection so far, I suppose, is it's quite energizing to see the people here today from different aspects of that supply chain and different aspects of what's needed to fix, I suppose, some of the issues, coming together and having the enthusiasm and seeing the business imperative of doing this. I think from government, when particularly in the UK at the moment, maybe in the US as well, when you're reading headlines about whether we need to get to net zero or not, you come and speak with the business community, and absolutely we need to get to net zero because of that business imperative. No matter your politics, it's the thing to be doing now if you want to be in business in future. So for me, when I sit with my policy team back in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, you can sometimes feel a bit weighed down by I suppose, the weight of the challenge that we face sometimes, whereas actually coming here, it's really energizing to know that no one's alone and we're all fighting in the same direction to overcome these challenges for many reasons. In terms of the role for governments, I think we've heard it a lot already this morning in creating demand for low carbon products. Where's government's main role in that? Well, what we hear from you is the need for certainty and continuity in that certainty. So not constantly moving the goalposts of what might be required. So what that looks like for us is looking at how we can set that long-term direction that there will be demand so that it becomes an economically viable proposition to actually invest in the decarbonisation, because you know there will be a market there for your low-carbon product. How are we doing that in the UK? That's looking at developing guidance for buyers, for producers, on what it means to actually measure the carbon in a product, how you verify that measure, how you set what is a low carbon product, so what is that standard, and then the key thing here that I'm being asked of, I suppose, by colleagues on the panel, is actually then using those standards and using those processes to get them into our public procurement. So where government is spending money on procurement, which it's a big player in procurement, making sure that money is being levered towards the low carbon versions of these products. And I think that's where we can really, really add value. The other thing we're doing, and we might get onto this later in the panel in a bit more detail, is for setting that long-term trajectory. We have made our industrial deep decarbonisation initiative commitment to be procuring low-carbon steel, cement and concrete by 2030, and that's absolutely what's driving our work. Yeah.
Thanks, Olivia. And I'm glad you mentioned that because that sort of moves us into the next panel a little bit. So we've spoken at a high level about the sort of needs that are out there, the status of the landscape at the moment. But one of the things we wanted to discuss in this panel was talking about specific examples and cases of where things are moving. So we know that there are these examples out there of low carbon cement and concrete projects. But what is it that needs to happen to move from isolated cases to widespread market adoption? And for this, I wanted to start with Emma and Winston, the same question for both of you. Could you share some examples of where collaboration between suppliers and customers has enabled the uptake of low carbon cement and concrete? And what made those collaboration possible? So Emma, if you want to kick off.
Yes, thank you. So I will use Norway as an example, since we are both in Norway, both Heidelberg and Skanska. So working together on the use of the new cement coming out from Brevik plant. We have some customers in the Norwegian market that really care about carbon reduction, which is super good. We also have customers that are not that don't have to report according to the greenhouse gas protocol, which means that they can really benefit from using the high-end CCS product with 100% capturing in their communication and so on. So we have used the product. We have supported the building of the plant. We also understand that when you put an investment like this from Heidelberg perspective in a small country as Norway, if Norway alone should use all the cement coming out from this facility with 50 to 100% reduction, depending on how you calculate it, it would be super expensive. And for construction industry, the products coming out, even if it's CCS or if it's SCMs reducing the carbon in the products, it needs to be cost competitive. The construction industry cannot afford like time 4 or time 10 increase of the price of cement at this point. So we need to find a system that supports scaling so the investment can get paid off and it will not impact one single market because the cement plant will be somewhere physically in the market. So using it in our products, showing that it's possible, that's one of the good examples. We have used the Evo Build product too, that is 50% capturing. With that product, you get the reduction in the EPD. We can mix an own design of the recipe to drive it down to maybe 80–90% of carbon less in that product, which is super good. So we use that a lot. It comes with a slightly lower price, and you have a broader spectrum of customers. But again, working with Industrial Acceleration Act that only demands or have as a suggestion for 5% purchase on the cement and concrete space. That could be at least 25% is my and Skanska's view. And using public procurement to really support the projects that are paid by public money to really use the possibility for sustainable and low carbon solutions as a demand will really help driving this.
Thank you. And Winston, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Surprise, surprise. I prepared the same case study. No, but it's a great cooperation because indeed Skanska was one of our first customers from the new cements coming out of Brevik. But I think a few things have been said already which really helps us in these new cooperations. I think what Annika said is trust. I think trust is absolutely key. And also the new way of working is that you need to start the collaboration and the discussion as early as possible in the design phase, right? Because that helps you to very early on face these barriers and overcome them sooner, because before they grow bigger and bigger, and really agree on the trade-offs when it comes to timelines, when it comes to design adjustments, when it comes to pricing. So trust and early collaboration, I think, is absolutely key. What helps us, of course, and that was also mentioned by Olivia, are the demand signals, right? So either having clear procurement ambition, or even having also sustainability targets and communicating them early on. And Skanska and Vattenfall are key examples here, because they really do that very very proactively. Now, coming back to the product we are selling out of Brevik. So we are capturing 50% of the emissions with CCS, right, and storing them permanently underground. 50% because it's a project we have started on 15 years ago. We are limited by some of the technical features. And what we are doing is we are using chain of custody to, first of all, show what technically CCS can achieve, which is a near zero cement, and also to be able to transport the CO2 reduction from one plant to another plant in another country, which helps us to create a market for these near zero cements without having to transport the heavy bulk material, which would create further emissions. And this chain of custody, or book and claim, as you will, which you may know already from sustainable aviation fuels or from the renewable sector, we believe is key for heavy construction material. Because technologies like CCS will not be scaled everywhere now. They will grow incrementally. And here, I think, again, the collaboration and the trust with our customers, but also, as was mentioned, with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and SBTi is absolutely key. We see now SBTi and both the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. I mean, there will be a lot of talks this week about these environmental attribute certificates is really growing and gaining in importance. And also, together with the GCCA, we are building on a rule book, on a framework to have a standardized process for the entire industry. Because we are doing it now as Heidelberg Materials, but it's and we are a first mover in that sector, but it's very clear that we cannot do it as a company alone, but we need to work together with our industry and with our value chain in order to create also credibility for these types of schemes.
And I guess removing those geographic constraints are one way to really be able to increase demand or increase the market size of availability. Olivia, so we talked a little bit about public procurement, or rather it's been mentioned quite a lot, actually. And you also talked about the IDDI and the work that the UK is doing in that respect. So what is your ambition behind the pledge, behind the IDDI pledge, and how is it being implemented in practice? And what are the practicalities and challenges of making it real?
Thanks. Yeah. So, I mean, the ambition behind it is to help us on our path to net zero and to really drive up demand for low carbon products. How are we getting there? Well, we've been on quite a journey over the last few years, and thanks to those in the room who've been responding to our quite technical consultations on developing the market for low carbon products. I know the GCCA certainly put in a response and have been attending our stakeholder workshops. But this whole area of work is about looking at how do we measure the carbon in a product, and how can we do that in a consistent way so that wherever you are in the supply chain, you can be sure, whether you're the procurer, whether the architect, that when someone's telling you how much carbon is in a product, you can know you can compare like for like with another product. So where are you setting the boundaries? Can we have a consistent way of doing that? And I was actually last week up in Sheffield at the Life Cycle Assessment Network annual event, which was great to see the growing industry there of people passionate about accurately measuring carbon in products. And I think the word of the day there was harmonization, and not wanting a proliferation of standards so that every company is using their own version of how you measure, but bringing all that together and having one approach, which means you can get that comparability. So that's the first bit of, I suppose, the step in our process for how we're going to get to our commitment. The second bit is then, when you can measure the carbon, what are we setting as a low carbon standard for those products, which again, we're working very closely with industry partners, including in this room, to look at what model we use for that, for steel, cement and concrete. And then the final piece, which is the key one, is then when you know how to measure and that you can verify what you're measuring, when you've set that low carbon standard, how are we working that standard into public procurement policies? And that will be key to then driving the demand and gradually over time ratcheting up how much of the low carbon products we would expect to be bought with public money. And that's the key to driving the demand. We published our government response to the technical consultation in May, so not so long ago, and that's where we committed to publishing this guidance in 2027. So we're hard at work now, including expecting a lot more stakeholder engagement to make sure we get that right. We have heard loud and clear that we don't want to be adding to the proliferation of different guidance and standards, but actually really trying to make the harmonisation work.
Absolutely, and I guess that's finding that balance is right. You don't want to introduce a compliance burden that makes things more difficult than they already are, but at the same time be able to start ratcheting up and get to that ambition you're describing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And so, Annika, lastly, I wanted to come to you in this round because we've talked about partnerships. You mentioned the ecosystem building. You also mentioned the partnership that you have with Inhibrit, with SSAB and LKAB. And I wanted to know, as part of those partnerships, what lessons can you take from that experience with Hibrit and the other partnerships that you also have with cement to take to the scaling up of demand for cement and concrete?
I think it will very much come back to what I said with building the entire ecosystem, because I think the learning when we were producing the fossil-free steel with Hybrid, and then we wanted to buy a dam hatch. And then we put out on the market saying that we would like to have a fossil-free dam hatch. And then the same thing happened. No, it's not possible. We cannot do that. So what we did, just to be very hands-on, we made an agreement with SSAB, because even if we are part of producing the fossil-free steel, once you get it out of there, it's a direct commercial agreement with SSAB. So we made an agreement with them on the volume we needed, on the price that we needed, on the time of delivery between us and SSAB. But then in the very end, then we went out with the tendering process asking for a dam hatch, or a dam gate, whatever you want to call it. And then we told, in that tendering process, we said, we want this dam hatch, but you already have this specific steel with these specifications, with this price, etc. And it's based on that you will need to offer something to us. So it's becoming very sort of hands-on how you do that. And if we transfer that over to cement, at least for us, it becomes even more difficult, because then we have 1, 2, 3 more additional actors in between. And to give an example here, and we haven't spoken about that, Emma, but I've spoken to colleagues of yours. There we've had similar things when we've gone out in tendering processes asking for near zero cement, and then we have a balance of plant actor that are then to build the onshore wind farm. And then they say, no, we will see what we can find. And then in their turn, later on, they come back and said, sorry, no, we can only find a little bit lower emitting concrete. And then we said, okay, but if that's the case, and they claimed it had to do with the location, etc. Later on, I then met a colleague of yours in Skanska, and then they said, you know what? We found out at a too late stage that it was actually Vattenfall that was the taker of what we had offered to another actor that in turn had offered it to another actor. And then they said, if we only had knew, then we would have given you the correct offer. So now what our key learning is that no matter what you put out in your tendering requirements, etc., you need to have all the actors in there from the beginning in order for it to be very clear. So that's what we now have, an agreement with a startup that is called Semvision. We now have an agreement with them that we will put them in contact with all our so-called balance of plant actors. And as the next step, when they have understood what this is all about, we're going to sit down with the balance of plant actor and their suppliers, where Skanska sometimes is a supplier, and then have the discussion again, just to secure that everyone knows that there is material available and that they then know where to ask for that. But it is very, very complex when you are far away from the material supplier to get it all the way to the end customer. So again, my clear sort of learning from this is we definitely need to work in new ways, like we said. There is no other way, and we need to get all the actors to the table at the same time. So it requires a lot from us, all the actors in there, but on the other hand, it's the only way that we can speed things up. So the trust, the collaboration, and daring to bring everyone to the table is the clear learning we've had. And also, if I specifically look at the hybrid partnership, the thing that was successful there is that we had a joint target and the aim, and that is the first key thing, but we also had an aligned timeline. because we've exited a number of partnerships as well, where we had the clear same golden targets. But then when we got to the timeline, we would say, okay, so let's start and get it done in 2 years. And then the other actors said, no, 10 years time period. So that's also an additional thing that you need to bring in.
But it's fantastic to see that those examples are coming in and those early conversations are happening, and hopefully that spreads wider throughout the industry. We've spoken quite a bit about sort of what's happened so far, and I wanted to just have, before we open up to the audience, just go for a little bit of a forward look. And I wanted to pose the question to all of you as a quick fire round, so please keep your answers brief. But I wanted to ask you all, so if you look over the next year, if you look ahead over the next year, what do you see as some of the changes in the policy or business landscape that could make the biggest difference when it comes to the supply and uptake of low-carbon materials? So, Olivia, if you want to start, since you have the mic.
I've got the mic, yeah. Gosh, what do I want to say over the next year? I want to see us making really rapid progress on, I suppose, apart to your point, who's involved in this. I mean, I've been talking to you about this procurer's guidance, but at the minute we're doing the mapping of what do we mean by when we say a procurer, because it's not the person who just has the purse strings at the end. It's everyone in that supply chain, because if we're only getting to you at the end, you've missed the chance. So that's key for us, really nailing down who is in this system that we need to influence and making progress on that. And the only other thing I'd add is we have to be really careful where government plays its role, because it obviously can't do anything and it's not its role to do everything. There are many people in this room who have the expertise to do far more than we do, but there are still some areas, particularly in the UK, where government action can make a difference. And I think we are actively exploring what we could do on things like looking at the development of calcined clay and its use. So I think making progress there would be good.
I think the first and foremost important is to stay on course with the climate commitments and don't change, like you said, Olivia. We don't want these shifts back and forth. And of course, to support that is a very strong EU ETS that is absolutely needed as well. So I think that, and then you've already mentioned as well the public procurement. I think that is definitely not used to the extent that is needed. And then in general, the understanding that I've been talking about, the understanding of getting all the actors in the ecosystem in there and dare to try to work in new ways, because it means you sign contract in a different way, you have different actors in there, and also realizing that you cannot, I think you talked about that, Emma, you cannot just push all the premiums and risk towards the end consumer or to the early material supplier. Everyone in the chain need to divide the risks and rewards along that chain.
Yes, so emitting carbon must come with a cost. I totally agree on that. But also the low carbon products must come with the full value for the customer. So, and to achieve that, we need the policy landscape, the standards, the legislation, everything to support this and enable this to happen. And when we are there, if we use public procurement wisely and make sure that supply and demand balance off goes hand in hand, then I think we are going to scale this largely in the coming 5 years.
Yeah, Annika and I have the same speaking points, but first of all, I also wanted to mention that we really need to get back to a more positive narrative again. I mean, being an energy-intensive industry is hard in these days, but all the structural deficits are not related only to carbon pricing. It's related to energy, it's related to administration costs, it's related to inflation, etc. And we believe that it's not just a climate necessity, but it will also make economic sense going forward. Then, of course, I think it was mentioned, updated standards and greenhouse gas accounting, I think is absolutely key. And the final thing is indeed also was mentioned procurement. I mean, we have the UNIDO's IDDI, where the UK government is very much involved in. We have now in Europe the discussion around this Industry Accelerator Act. Unfortunately, we don't yet really see neither the ambition nor the urgency to really put that the foot on the ground and implement also these in clear procurement quotas. And that would extremely help to get these technologies off the market, also for public procurement, because cement and concrete, I think around 30% is going directly into public projects and 20% indirectly. So governments really can take the lead here and can showcase what's possible.
Thank you all for the rich discussion and those points there. So I can now turn over to the floor and welcome your questions and comments. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, keep the questions concise, and please specify if you're asking it to one direct panelist. And I think we'll be helped with some mics going around the floor. So yeah, over to the floor.
Hello, I'm Zarina from Neocrete. We're a startup. And the question is to everyone. And the question is about it's called Climate Action Week. So the question is, these are all amazing initiatives. And what do you think are the bottlenecks between having a great motivation, making a decision, and then actually acting on it? So that's whether it's procurement, whether it is financial decision, where it is what kind of startup to invest in, and when do we start talking in months and not years about any project, and how do we resolve those bottlenecks? Thank you.
Who would like to start?
I'm going to be boring because I'm going to say it doesn't start only with procurement or finance or someone. We're back to the point that a company or the actor need to decide that they want to do something. And we said it's not an ether pass. So we don't know exactly how to do it. So it's about sitting down, deciding, bringing the closest actors in there to just secure that you do it. If I take Vattenfall as an example, again, when we were going to do this the first time, I went to procurement and said, now you put in the requirements and you ask for that. And they said, no, but this is not working. And that's when I again then said, okay, but if I have other contacts with a startup or someone, you need to sit down with them. And then you need to figure out how can you go around it. So I would say it's just lean in, start working with it, do it. Don't wait for the change of processes or changes from governance or whatever, but you also need to somehow present the case and the reason why you want to do it to the decision makers. So you need to have the decision making there, but just start doing it. And there is no perfect process. If we're going to wait for the processes, it's going to take years. I agree.
Yeah, and I can build on that, being a bit, giving the construction industry, aka myself also, some feedback is that construction is very local, and we tend to do a lot of pilot projects. We can convince the customer, the ecosystem around that project, and we do something, use new solutions and so on, but it tends to stick in that project. It never scales, because then you need to convince the next ecosystem and the next one and the next one, and it never ends. So we need to move from pilot projects to more mainstream, and then everything needs to support it, and the demand needs to be there from the beginning, so this becomes the new normal. And I think the move from being pilots to the new normal doesn't come with one single enabler. It's many things, like a chain of things that we talked about that needs to happen to enable that.
Thanks for a good discussion. My name is Thomas Kotkær from Novo Holdings, investment firm. My question to the panel here is about the innovative part. What kind of features of low carbon cement would you like to see beyond the low emission? Because very often when it comes to innovation, there needs to be some excitement that drives demand. Because the low carbon part is sort of a supply chain, but what are the features beyond?
Oh, I have a wish. I'm going to pass the mic on after this one. So a wish is always to get better functionality, of course, or higher quality, or a more safe way of handling the material, the product, and so on. So any add-on value that a new product brings is super good. Then that is low carbon could be like an add-on, a very valuable add-on. But if you can communicate from the other perspective, like it brings technical benefits or higher quality or longer lifetime or whatever, that seems to stick harder, like as a first selling point. So everything that moves within that span is super welcome. So selling a low carbon product that comes with worse benefits than the traditional one, that will not ever scale. So it needs to be something else too.
No, but that is exactly the case. If I bring this little startup, this Ambition company, what we've realized, because we've used our lab there to test the quality of that in order for us to later on dare to trust to have it. And then it turned out that it's much stronger than the original one. So you have all those extra features. It endures the cold climate better, etc. And that's what you're definitely willing to pay for. And then the extra benefit is that it comes at an even lower price than some of the carbon capture versions that you have, because you're changing so many of the additives in there. But it's, I agree, you need to have those extra features. That's what you should aim for.
I think maybe I can just add on the extra features. I mean, indeed, I agree that adds a lot of value to our customers. I mean, for example, for the CCS-enabled cement, the advantage is that it's actually the same product. So you can use it, for example, very well for offshore wind parks or other things. When we use calcined clay, for example, as I mentioned before, in Africa, the advantage is that we don't have limestone reserves, so we actually use local resources, and actually the final product is quite often even better in the strength classes, so it really adds value. On the other hand, this product has one apparent disadvantage, is that it's not gray, but it's pink. And apparently that is quite hard for some of our customers to swallow because change apparently is never good. So I think what we also need to do in addition to communicate these extra values is really to raise awareness and to educate about these new solutions. Because yes, sometimes maybe the performance is slightly different, or you have to use these products in a slightly different way. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the product is inferior in quality. So it's a lot about education and awareness raising as well.
Hi, my name is Abdurrahman, and I'm from Holcim. My question is for you, Olivia. First of all, thank you for the good discussion, and I cannot agree more with what you mentioned about the calculation, validation, and then having a definition for what is low carbon. For me, this is very important. How do you think we can define a low carbon concrete or a low carbon cement globally so that we can have an equal play field? And the second question is for you, Emma. Would you differentiate between a low carbon concrete and a very low carbon concrete and a net zero concrete? So how would this respond to your needs and, to your point, a value, translating this to a value to the customer? Thank you.
Thanks. So on the point of how do you define and how do we work globally on that, I think our starting point and in our consultations is that we're not necessarily looking to create our own system. We have looked what already exists, including in other countries, and that's what we consulted on. We wanted feedback on the existing systems, whether it's European, whether it's here, whether for concrete it's GCCA's own brand of low carbon concrete. But looking at existing standards and seeing, well, what would work? What do we think works? What are the characteristics, and can we work with one of those that we know is already used across boundaries? As I said, kind of during the panel, we don't want to add additional criteria or bureaucracy into this already quite complex system. So it's very much looking to work with our other governments on what they're doing and to use existing standards where we can, or at least define what's within them, what is the interoperability, and be clear on that if you're using that standard, it still applies. So that's very much what we're looking at. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. And it's a super interesting question, actually, because in some of the markets, and especially in the Nordics, I would say that around 60% of all the concrete mixes today that we buy from Skanska is some sort of low carbon already, with maybe a reduction of 30% or something. But if we come to the next step of low carbon, let's say if we have a reduction of maybe 80% carbon mix, that often comes with a price premium. You might move beyond only using slag and fly ash and the common different binders that you use. So if it comes with a price premium, it depends on the contract if the willingness to pay is there or not. We have in this report, again, some 4 good examples where the customer is willing to pay for carbon reduction, and when we have the incentives needed to do reduction in different, so Lower Thames Crossing, for example, as a carbon pathfinder project is in this. We have a Norwegian project, E10 project up north in Norway, where the customer has put the price on carbon emissions, which means that if we can provide solutions with lower carbon emission, that gets balanced with them putting a price on, like the bad concrete without reduction will come with a higher price because they price in the carbon emissions, which is super good and really enables us to use low carbon solution. Then when it comes to the high-end product, like a net zero concrete, today, with the CCS cement, it's hard to get an EPD down to 0 for a net zero product. So the benefit does not automatically transfer to the end customer if the customer is reporting to the greenhouse gas protocol, which like 90% of our customers are. So when we find the right customer, the willingness to pay is there, but for others, it might not be. So for us really working on getting the reduction into the EPD value of the concrete, that is key to transform the value over to the customer. Then we have a higher willingness to pay.
Yeah. Just to add to that, it's actually not hard to get an EPD for CCS-enabled cement. It's impossible right now, based on the current EPD standard. There's work ongoing within the European Standardization Organization, for example, to update the frameworks, but I can tell you the discussion goes nowhere. So speeding up that process would already help a lot, because indeed our customers need more clarity, and if they buy a green product, they should also be able to get a green EPD. Yeah? Just on the having a harmonized scheme for how to rate CO2 reduction, I think GCCA would be quite upset if I don't mention that. As an industry, we did come up actually with a low carbon rating framework, which goes from A to D and beyond, which the whole idea is to harmonize the process, to give a bit more transparency and to make it possible for our customers to compare different products in different regions. So we do have a framework available, which I think is now also rolled out in quite a lot of countries. I mean, Germany, for example, has already used it for their new CCC labels for cement products. I think UK has also looked at it for concrete, and I think that's a real advancement. Of course, baselines in different regions are different, so there is some flexibility built in. But the idea is that this could be used as a basis to come forward with procurement rules, and I think there's discussion ongoing on how to use it, for example, in this UNIDO IDDI scheme.
Thank you so much. And I think we have time for one last question, if we're very quick and direct to one person. So please.
Thank you very much. It's very good to hear the comments about the GCCA A2F label. My name is Richard Tarberton. I'm with the World Resources Institute, and we developed the Greenhouse Gas Protocol going back in time. So I'm very pleased to hear all the work being proposed to further improve standards. Standards, I think, are what help the whole thing move forward. However, what we've heard today on the panel is also a consensus of needing to have the right demand signals to create the product incentives that will create demand for low carbon cement and concrete. We've got carbon pricing in the form of EU ETS. The public procurement standard and commitments which can be made by government will be very powerful. However, they rely on individual taxpayers ultimately to pay the price premium for those contracts. Are there better mechanisms which you would like to see coming into the marketplace? I'm thinking of Olivia in particular here, but also others. What market mechanisms do you think could be effective to make low carbon products more profitable, less expensive, and make high carbon concrete products carry a higher tax or penalty, as we've seen with electric cars, as we've seen with solar panels. We've had incentives which have allowed those markets to take off. What incentives can we see for concrete? Thanks.
Thanks. It's not specific just to concrete, but obviously you mentioned there the EU ETS. We have our own UK ETS, which is a big driver of carbon pricing in this country. We are obviously in live negotiation at the moment about how those systems could work more closely together, at which there's a summit coming up at the end of next month, which I'm sure will be looked on with interest to see how that develops. But in terms of other mechanisms, we also have in January next year the carbon border adjustment mechanism coming in, which again will be another market-wide signal for how we are starting to do more to price in the carbon cost into products. And I'm open-eared to hear, what other options there could be, but these are our big economic-wide levers to get us valuing carbon at the cost it should be recognised at.
And maybe that's a great opportunity for the coffee break when we have it. So maybe if I just stop there and just thank you so much to the audience for the questions and from the panelists. It's very clear that there are a few elements that are there within grasp. So the building of ecosystems, the regulatory framework, the risk and reward sharing that was mentioned. And maybe to end on a good note, which is taking Winston's words on the positive narrative, these things are all within our collective agency to change. So let's see what we come back with next year if we find ourselves in London again. So please join me in thanking our panelists, Emma, Olivia, Annika, and Winston. Thanks so much.
And thank you to Philippe for such excellent moderation. What a great panel that was. We're not breaking yet, I'm afraid. We're definitely not breaking yet. We're locking the doors for another 50 minutes or so, but then we'll have a good break for networking. We just need to rearrange the stage and get a lectern on. Couple of things to reflect on while we're doing that. The UK Prime Minister has resigned. If you haven't seen that, we sort of probably knew that was coming, but I think that tells us that we need to drive our own leadership within the ecosystem that we have. We cannot necessarily be reliant on political leadership, and we know that the consensus around decarbonisation is changing across the world. And Adam talked so eloquently about that our industry remains and retains that commitment, and absolutely that's the case, and exactly why we are still engaged in events like this. Just a very quick plug, please do use the GCCA website. Winston eloquently talked about the book and claim system. The GCCA is establishing its own book and claim system, hopefully looking to launch some pilots on that in the new year, but lots of information on the GCCA website, as is much of the things that you've heard today. So just a little bit of a change again. We've heard the importance of the value chain. We had a couple of key speakers there talking about the built environment, and that's absolutely key. The GCCA roadmap speaks to and alludes to our materials being used better, more efficiently within construction, within a circular economy. And to provide a bit of sort of deeper reflection on that, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Régis Meyer, who is the ICBC co-chair. He is a decarbonisation expert within the Ministry of Ecological Transition, Energy, Climate and Risk Prevention within the French government. Régis, over to you.
So change of prime minister is the cost or the price of democracy as well. So I think it's a good thing as well. So I'm here as a representative of the French government, co-chair of the not the Chinese bank, the ICBC, that's the Intergovernmental Council for Building and Climate, with Brazil and Kenya. This council gathered 70 governments ready to implement the Declaration Chaillot. The Declaration Chaillot was set during the first Global Forum for Building and Climate in 2024. And it's not a roadmap, but it's different elements that shape what we want the pathway to the zero carbon and resilient building. So, and here, my message is one thing to remain after, is that really ICBC is a place where we try to coordinate action between government, but as well inside government, between ministers, because as you said, you have work for the value chain, but as well between government and different departments need to cooperate a little deeper. That's for us a value of the ICBC is to really is designed to help implementation. So I will not follow my my speech because it's very too long. And you know the cement better than the industry better than I, so I don't want to recall that. So, but the first ministerial meeting in Belém decided a few to support few action. And what I think is very important here is that we believe that the SCMs are mature solution in many countries, and even if there is for sure CCS as a solution, but a more general, accessible solution is SCM. So what we think that launching this call for additional minerals to decrease the clinker ratio in cement and concrete is to have government ready to overlook or to progress in their standards concerning cement, in their codes, building codes to refer to this standard, in their regulation. Because we talk about procurement, but for instance in France, for the building sector, now you have a low carbon, unbounded carbon approach, so we create a market. It's not a procurement, you're obliged to calculate, or it's not necessarily developing only low carbon cement, you can develop as well some wood or biogenic materials, but it creates a market. And for sure you have a pilot project, like for instance the Olympic Games village has been a huge help to create, to structure the market in France, because it was a very huge project, and it gave us all the value chain to understand how to provide at scale low carbon cement. So the idea, so I repeat, is to bring this government with association with GCCA, but as well with systemic and zero, don't forget, zero carbon or carbon zero. Yeah, sorry, yeah, it's always mixed in French and concrete zero. So we are very pleased to work together. So the idea there is to have government ready to cooperate with industry and cooperate between other government and between departments to have standard, building codes, procurement. Because when you say procurement, you mean infrastructure. For infrastructure, I think there is two markets. One is public infrastructure, where you have really specific role of the state, and you have the building sector, which is more fragmented probably, and the state are maybe a different way because procurement in the building sector maybe is different. But I want to recall that the FIDIC makes some progress as well to have a framework for carbon assessment. So I think in the infrastructure world, other associations are ready to help to structure the market for the demand for low carbon material and low carbon cement. So here I represent, I hope, the will that the demand will be more structured and ready at scale. So I hope that we can work together, and the ICBC, it's the first year of the ICBC, because the first ministerial was only in Belém, can prove its added value. Thank you.
Thank you, Regis, for your leadership and indeed the collaboration. Really important that we work with you and the new initiative there. Really important, actually. Of course, this whole topic is about mitigation, climate mitigation. But it is interesting to see risk prevention in your title. And of course, the engagement that we undertake at the GCCA, we see that climate adaptation is growing in urgency and importance. And of course, cement and concrete will play a really important role in building the resilient infrastructure and communities that the world needs. Okay, so we're going to move to our next panel. And I assure you, after this one, we're going to have a short break. So this panel is all about global solutions and local realities, driving local carbon transition. Because, of course, it's all good having a big global roadmap, global context, but action happens on the ground at the local context. And so this panel will focus on the solutions that are happening, as well as the policy and other enabling activities that can make sure that they're transferable to the global south. For those that don't know, approximately 80% of cement and concrete production is in what we call the global south. So it's important that all these solutions that we talk about are transferable in some way. So I'm going to pass the floor over to the next moderator, my colleague and force of nature, Jana Saska, who is the head of advocacy and policy at the GCCA. So over to you, Jana, to introduce the panel.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. And I'll start with inviting my fellow panelists on the stage. So I'll be joined in this session by a fantastic lineup of speakers, including Sophie Merstadt from MPP, Mission Possible Partnership. Please take the stage. Thank you. And I'll continue with calling on the stage ladies. I hope the only gentleman we have on the panel won't take offense. We have Julia Sobrevilla, who is the Director of Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at UNASEM Group. Thank you. And the last but not least, I hope, I can see, we have Sarbojit Pal, Program Manager of Global Matchmaking Platform at UNIDO. Thank you very much. And the last panelist, Sri from Energiva Ventures, he can't be here with us today because of the other commitments, unfortunately. So we either will have more time for panel discussion or more time for networking. Let's see how we will get on. Thank you. Thank you. So before we start, let me provide a little bit more of context why we are actually here to talk about emerging markets. I mean, my colleague Paul already alluded to it to some extent. We know that already today, almost 80% of global cement and concrete production takes place in emerging markets. Obviously, the growth in future demand is projected to take place mainly in global south. So this number might potentially, this share might potentially even grow over the next decades or even over the next few years. So we're looking at the pockets of growth, mainly in the countries of Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, but also in India. So I think the sheer scale of opportunity is clear. If most of the demand will be in the global south, it has a profound implication for our sector, right? So most of of the world's emission in our industry, but also the opportunity to avoid them will take place right in those markets. And the infrastructure that is being built right now in those emerging markets can actually lock in emissions for future decades. Will be news, right? Hopefully for a number of decades. So what we can do? Well, we can start building those buildings and houses and future infrastructure with low carbon materials, low carbon and cement concrete, to avoid actually locking those future emissions and hopefully avoid replacing those future assets. And we have already heard today, earlier, that climate action, climate ambition is a global commitment, right? Is increasingly global ambition. But local transition is inherently local, as you probably have a chance to see on a daily basis in your businesses or organizations that you work with. And Thomas already mentioned earlier today, at GCCA, we run the Net Zero Program Accelerator, where we actually work with local governments and industries to really sort of, help them to design their local decarbonization pathways. So we really know through GCC experience that that local transition will be delivered through national policies, investable projects, and local partnerships. So in this session, I really want us to sort of little bit delve into not only challenges, but also what works on the ground, in those markets, what can actually enable scale, what works in practice, and also where that collaboration is most needed. Julia, I'll start with you. UNASEM Group, obviously you have operation in Latin America, in US as well. And only a few years ago, very recently, you established company-wide decarbonization roadmap, right, with the ambition of net zero by 2050. So that's, I think, congratulations on that. But my question is more about where do you see sort of, challenges when it comes to actually translating those global ambition into company-level transition plans?
Thank you very much, Jana, and thanks for the invitation to be here. Good morning, everybody. I come from Peru. We're a company based in Peru. We have operations in Peru, Chile, Ecuador, and the United States. So we're mostly global south with a little bit of global north, but California, I don't know what it counts as, really. So we do have a huge challenge, and we have, different, as Winston mentioned, we have operations in not quite as many countries as Heidelberg, but we do look at decarbonization as one of our main objectives. We have effectively launched a roadmap for carbon zero for 2050 with industry standards, and we have the general usual levers, sort of in the cement industry. We have lower clinker factor that we're looking at across our different operations. We've got energy efficiency issues that we're also looking at our different operations with very different realities in all of the different geographies that we operate in. Alternative fuels, which is a huge opportunity as well as a huge challenge, in Latin America and in Peru and Ecuador. It's hugely challenging for sort of local politics and policy issues. We are looking at innovation as well. And we also have, sort of CCUs, but what we'd like to look at as sort of nature-based solutions. We have opened a discussion, and it's an ongoing discussion, is how do we implement this on a large scale, sort of looking at different sort of global standards and issues that are going on with nature-based solutions. The challenge for us is obviously having the same measurements and making sure that across all of our operations we have the same measurements that we're all looking at, with also global standards as well, because we want to be sure that we are being able to be measured in the local, sort of in the global standards with our local operations. So, and this is not, it sounds very easy, but it's not quite so easy, sort of like we have GNR established in some of our operations. Our other operations are not necessarily looking at it the same way. So it's, sort of how do we impulse the same standards across our own operations to make sure that we then are able to sort of be measured in with the same standards as the rest of operations globally. Now, our biggest challenge, I would say, I'd come back to, is the sort of the nature-based solutions portion of our decarbonization. Because we see a huge opportunity for reforestation conservation efforts for the Amazon basin. That's sort of like our back door. And so how do we make sure that we are complying with SBTI regulations, and how do we, are able to maybe influence having a bigger, possibilities or potentials to implement larger scale operations in that sort of area that will be able to be counted, I guess, in a global standard. So I think that that's a big sort of like big picture look at. Energy efficiency is huge for us as well. Sort of like is how to implement energy efficiency projects that we can scale, because we have, as I say, different geographies, gas, we have hydro, other operations that are still sort of like lagging behind in that sort of area. So those are the things that we're looking at. And our biggest challenge, I would say, is not keeping it local, but looking at it as a global sort of, first of all, a global company, ourselves, and then making sure that we're plugging into global standards. And that's sort of our bigger challenge as we grow.
Thanks, Julia. That's an interesting point. Let's maybe build on that. Sophie, you at Mission Possible Partnership, you work with industries, governments, right, and the rest of the ecosystem, innovators, but also investors. So from your perspective, obviously you have already supported the deployment of number of projects in emerging markets. From a transition perspective, what are the lessons that we have learned maybe over the last 5 to 10 years when it comes to actually building credible and reliable decarbonization pathways? And what are those main challenges between actually balancing climate ambition and then creating realistic local transition pathways to low carbon cement and concrete?
Thank you. And thanks for inviting me today as well. So I think if we take a step back and look at every type of decarbonisation roadmap that's out there, basically, whether it's global, local, in different regions, it generally consists of the same components, right? So there's always a bit of material efficiency, there's always a bit of energy efficiency, there's a bit of fuel switching, there's a portion of SCMs, and then there's something to close the gap, which is usually CCUS. And I think looking at different realities on the ground, I mean, something like CCUS today only works with, either a strong carbon price or other policy incentives, as well as generally some public support financially as well. So for many EMDEs, that's not a very realistic option, given that their carbon markets are still developing. So we do need to adapt to local contexts. And what we see for EMDEs is basically on the material efficiency side, it's a really, really powerful lever, and one that isn't always fully utilized yet, but it's not in the full control of the cement sector itself, right? It involves the whole value chain, and especially those at the end of the value chain on the demand side, to work that out. But I think that's a really important one, and it requires that collaboration across the value chain. If we look at alternative fuels, it's a good opportunity, but because it doesn't actually address process emissions, it doesn't really address the majority of the issue. And then there's a lot of interesting stuff going on globally in alternative binders, but these are all very nascent parts of research, which also in many contexts are just a little bit too far out. So we really do see SCMs as something that can be scaled today in a lot of regions, but it does need to take into account those local contexts, and some solutions that work in specific areas of the world can't just be copy-pasted to other jurisdictions. So what we're basically seeing is, CO2 pricing mechanisms are still very much emerging. Monitoring, verification and reporting is also still quite nascent. So those are all things we need to take into account in these countries. And I think what we see is if countries can start incentivizing the use of SCMs today, bearing in mind their very, very, very local realities, which generally aren't even just at the country level, but even at the sub-country level, right? There are some provinces in a country with specific access to types of SCMs, but maybe that's not where production is. It's all really, really intricate, and all the parts of the ecosystem need to work together to sort that out. But if there's a way for these countries to incentivize the use of SCMs and then ramp up that ambition over time, which means that you would also include some of the more, today less accessible solutions over time. I think that's a really promising way to look at a roadmap. And then the final thing I would mention from projects on the ground in EMDs is obviously financing. It can be really, really tricky when you have a very good business case on paper, when you have, something that works, that's at price parity and actually doesn't require such a huge capex outlay, but it can be killed by very high interest rates all the same. So I think that's an area where definitely EMDs deserve a bit of extra attention as well.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I think we hear it quite often that, especially in emerging markets, right, you need to see sort of the full picture when you're assessing decarbonization levers and supplementary cementitious materials. Obviously, we need to work on all decarbonization levers to reach the climate ambition and get us to low carbon cement and concrete. But maybe some of those, such as SCMs, are easily scalable and deployable in some of the markets over the other. And we heard from ICBC co-chair, Regis, that there is initiative on scaling actually SCMs globally that the GCCA is supporting as well. I'll get also on the point of collaboration across the value chain, Sophie, that you mentioned. We heard it obviously in the previous panel, but I really want to get a little bit deeper into that because I think how to activate that collaboration looks very different in Europe and in emerging markets. So I think we need to definitely touch upon that in the next segment of our discussion. I'll now turn to you, Sarbojit. Obviously at the GMP, and I'll let you introduce the initiative a little bit more, but you work, you actually match, right, projects with investors. You match technological providers with industry. So from your experience, where do you see really those gaps between the available technologies and the capacity or the ability of industry to implement them on the ground?
Thanks, Yana, and thanks first to GCCA and all the organizers for the session today. I think good morning. As Yana mentioned, I'm Shorbojit. I'm the program manager for the Global Matchmaking Platform Secretariat. It's a facility which was initiated by the Climate Club and hosted by the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. And what we essentially do is, as Yana touched upon, is work with emerging and developing countries to basically understand their needs for industry decarbonization projects and programs. And when we do that kind of needs assessment, we translate that into project documentation and proposals to put it out for the international community to help respond to those projects and programs. So it's a bit of a unique perspective that we have in the context of this discussion on emerging markets and developing countries, is that we are seeing that in this last year and a half since we have been established, we have been able to generate about 35, 36 different project requests. About 1/3 of these project requests are cement and concrete related. Many of these requests were, on roadmap development or articulation of high-level, policy approaches, but several of them are actually like almost project implementation requests. So I think even for the emerging markets, whether it's kind of on the far east, like countries like Vietnam or Indonesia, whether this is a topic of interest, or even in the far west, whether it's even in Peru, where we have had an explicit request for cement sector decarbonization, or Chile or Argentina, quite a few of these countries who are making clear asks for decarbonizing their cement sector. And I think what has been also kind of interesting in this process is that we are also seeing a bit of regional dynamics playing out. I mean, in the Latin American context, many of these requests have not only been kind of this high-level policy understanding the regulations, but also on specific, technology solutions. Like, can we increase the share of co-processing to reduce our clinker load? I mean, and this is like, something which is not just one country, but, I think it's a bit of a regional phenomenon that we are seeing. We move to kind of Africa, and like, whether it's North Africa or East Africa, I think there the conversation on LC3 is a little more more kind of prominent. I think, it's a bit of what you were touching upon, Sophie. It's what they have on there. Like, it's the availability of the resource. We move to kind of South Asia or Southeast Asia, there where the markets seem to be a little more kind of significantly more competitive in terms of the price differential. I found very interesting that this is also the region where some of these, so to say, high cost, but definitely important solutions like carbon capture are becoming more prominent. That's where we are getting these asks to, whether it's Thailand, where, with UNIDO, GCCA has done substantial amount of work. I mean, this is where these conversations on the new age technologies are coming up. So this is a bit of a conversation which is kind of largely, varied by different regions, which are also driving the conversation with regards to the choice of technology, approach of materials that they're taking, and then overlaying on many of these things, whether it's a process transition, whether it's a technology transition, which is required, then the question with regards to financing comes up. And I think this delta with regards to the incremental costs, rather than kind of positioning it on a bag of cement or a slab of concrete conversation, I think gradually we are able to kind of now getting into that space where even for emerging markets, it's a conversation on project scale cost, which is like, which we know, like, for the built environment, it's like 5 to 10% variation that sometimes we talk about. For others, it's when we, have the same discussion on the steel sector with, automobiles, it's a very different conversation. But gradually this conversation is currently happening. And then I think I'll also touch upon some of the findings from the emerging and developing countries, which pertains to the conversations which were happening in the previous segment. These countries are also now very, very interested to be part of the conversation when it comes to standards, when it comes to the conversation around shaping the discourse around EPDs, because the demand, as you very rightly said, Jana, this is where 70% of the demand for low carbon cement or concrete, forget low carbon, even cement for concrete till 2050 is going to be coming from. So it's a question of really having them participate also within this conversation, which has historically, of course, because the leading markets have been in Europe, in East Asia, and North America, that has been driving the conversation with regards to standards or kind of the approaches to take even on accounting, which I think is gradually becoming a bit of a ask from these countries. And if we are not able to kind of engage them in this process, it's going to be a bit of a missed opportunity where we'll probably need to take 2 steps forward and 1 step backward to kind of balance this. And then I think finally touching upon some of the couple of other regions which I did not mention, whether it's Central Asia, where this is also becoming a topic of interest, North Africa, as well as the Middle Eastern countries. I think these are the countries where what Olivier was touching upon, where CBAM is making these countries also rethink their cement sector decarbonization programming. So if you were to ask me whether they are very interested in understanding what their carbon markets are going to be like, I think that's a bit of a second order question for most of the countries. Some countries are certainly leading. I think Turkey, for instance, really up on the curve. But for many other countries, it's basically this external push which is actually driving the domestic conversation as well. So this is just a bit of, first flavor reflections for what we are seeing from different parts of the world, different regions of the world. In terms of, harmonization of efforts, I think I'll just also applaud GCCA's work in even setting the 6-stage process for setting up, a roadmap for cement sector, which has been also very popular and desired by these countries, which have helped spark these conversations. So yeah, I think these are just some opening reflections on this theme and topic.
Thanks, Sarbojit. You covered quite a lot of points there, from sort of financing to policy mechanisms. I think CBAM can be quite powerful one, especially when it comes to incentivizing actually industries in some markets, not all of them, to decarbonize. So we touch upon the challenges, right, that we see when it comes to transitioning our industry to low carbon. But we know that we have many technological solutions. Julia, you touch upon SCMs, energy efficiency, CCUS, obviously. Each of these solutions has its own challenges, and the level of the extent to which we can deploy it in emerging markets at the moment varies, right, from market to market. So if technological solutions are available, how do we actually scale them, right? At least those that are scalable in emerging markets. How do we move from pilot projects to wider deployment across the industry? Julia, how do you approach a challenge of scaling those solutions? How do you maybe sort of, select which technological solutions you deploy over the others? And maybe sort of follow-up question, to what extent the price green premium, the sort of, maybe ability of the buyers to pay for low carbon cement and concrete plays into your decisions?
I'm going to start by answering the last part first, because that sort of gives the answer for the first part, which is in most of our markets, pricing changes are really very hardly an option. Countries like Peru and Ecuador are essentially auto construction or self-construction, so it's a sort of very small scale pricing. Maybe Chile, and definitely the United States has a different reality, but sort of like our bulk, bigger countries have very different realities. So that is a huge challenge for us. So how do we scale? So if we can have bigger projects and pilots like in our sort of like bigger countries, more developed countries. So we're piloting things in the US, alternative fuels is a huge thing that we're piloting in the US. And how do we bring them to sort of our countries like Peru? We don't have mills in Chile, so that also is a differentiating factor. We don't have kilns, we have mills. So we have to look at potential pilots that we can scale across our geographies. And that makes it sort of like very specific as to what we can do. So we're looking at industrial solutions first, as how do we use alternative fuels, or calcined clays or pozzolan or other clinker reduction factors. And the other second one that we're really looking at, that we're scaling up across all our geographies, is energy. That's our bigger sort of like way of looking at how do we scale up pilot projects and ramp them up. Even though, like I said before, we have very different geographical situations, and possibilities. Energy, we've found that energy solutions and sort of like making and making a huge leap into sort of energy efficiency, and we've created sort of a centralized way of looking at energy across all of our geographies, which has been we started with a pilot in Arizona, and then we have a pilot, sort of a solar pilot in Peru, and that we're scaling up. So we're looking at that sort of potential as something that we can build across all of our geographies faster. That doesn't mean that we're not going to do the other ones, but that's the one that we've seen sort of faster. And the second one, obviously, is sort of the industrial factor.
Perfect. Sophie, I think we discussed policy levers to some extent, not that much on this panel, in the previous one as well, but obviously to create right enabling conditions is equally important in emerging markets. What enabling conditions do governments need to create? Maybe even before some of the technologies are fully commercially scalable. Any sort of good example of government practice that you can share from emerging markets context?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jana. I think maybe just a tiny step back to make things a bit more specific, because of course there's this whole host of solutions out there. But maybe if I zoom in terms of the types of barriers we're seeing on SCMs, because SCMs, like I just said before, they're cost competitive, They're generally quite widely available, different mixes. They actually address quite a large share of emissions. And I think critically for emerging markets, they avoid lock-in into like big volumes of clinker capacity that could then become stranded later on. So that's one of the areas where we're focusing. And then if I look at the barriers first, and then we can go into some government policy, I think what we're seeing is, first of all, there's still quite a bit of demand conservatism. So basically, there's no demand signals from governments yet, but also there's a perception that OPC is stronger still. And also, some engineers in some countries, they face really, really high liability issues if anything were ever to go wrong. So it's easier to kind of, stick with what you know. And then if we look at things like standards, a lot of cement and concrete standards in EMDEs still refer back to older versions of, for example, EU or US standards, which don't recognize a lot of those new blends and actually basically block the potential of some of these. And then there's another point, which is, on paper, SCMs are generally always competitive. But like I mentioned before, it can be quite tricky on the ground, especially if there's a geographical misalignment between where production is and where SCMs are. Actually, the transportation cost can add a cost that suddenly isn't accounted for when you were doing your maths on paper. Plus, there's quite a bit of use of fillers today, which can actually make the baseline that you're competing with cheaper than just pure OPC. And then finally, I think what we're seeing, and it was already alluded to just now, is a lot of the construction practices are relatively informal. So there's still a lot of cement sold in bags. In EMDEs, mainly sold in bags. And obviously, using things like SCMs, it requires a bit more handling knowledge. You need to do things differently. So how do you give people the knowledge to actually work with it? And you can see things like batching happening or precast products, which can help with that. Maybe then, again, zooming out a bit from SCMs and looking at what governments are doing already in EMDEs and what are some good examples of policy. So we see, for example, in Turkey, they are actually one of the first 2 countries in the world, together with Ireland, to mandate a minimum percentage of clinker substitution in all public procurement. And they've started at 20% by 2025, but ramping up to 25% by 2030 with, the ability to, further ratchet up after that. And I think that's quite, that's a really interesting one, and more countries could follow that example. And then I think, there is a bit of a long-term, short-term perspective here, but at least in the immediate term, for example, India has mandated the use of fly ash in construction. And I think power plants are actually now required to ensure 100% utilization of their fly ash, which obviously really helps as well. And then if we're looking, for example, in Africa, we see that last year CBI Ghana commissioned the world's largest clay calcination facility, and they've worked really closely with domestic and even regional standards authorities, and they've implemented a new LC3 standard that actually goes further than anything we've seen elsewhere in the world. And they've even already, like you said, before the technology is there, they're not yet at 35% clinker, but they've already got the regulation in place that that's going to be accepted, which I think is really, really cool. And then finally, if we take another step back at one of the solutions that probably is going to take a bit more time in EMDEs, CCUS, we see that some governments are taking steps to ensure that the frameworks are already there, even if the technology, isn't commercially viable yet over there. So, for example, Indonesia has taken a big step to recognize CCUS, but also to enable the value chain to develop. So, for capture, transport, storage, licensing, MRV, but also environment and safety, they've made sure that there's a lot more specificity. And actually, that's really ahead of the curve, because we see even in places in Europe, like Greece, for example, a lot of that is still under development. So I think it's really impressive that Indonesia has already taken that step and started to think that out. So you do actually see on the policy side in EMDEs that steps are being taken, which is, I think, really, really cool. And we can all be inspired by and see whether other countries can follow suit.
Perfect. Thank you, Sophie. That was impressive variety of case studies that you shared with us across emerging markets. So thank you for that. I'm afraid we're running out of the time, so I encourage you to provide shorter answers, but I cannot leave this panel without actually touching upon the collaboration, right? We heard about it a lot in the previous panel. And obviously activating collaboration across the value chain, so meaning not only governments, innovators, financial institutions, but mainly buyers, right? Construction industry. How we can actually go about creating those links and incentivize actually our partners, Julia, your actually partners, your procurers to buy more of a low carbon cement and concrete. I think that's something that would be interesting to hear your thoughts on.
Well, we have I'll go back to the prior panel because I think this touches on creating demand for, demand from the whole supply chain for lower carbon cement. It's really, really hard. In some of our geographies, we have sort of like policy help. Or incentives and policy for doing that, and so that's easier. California is an easy example. Arizona is way back there, but we don't have that very much either in sort of like Peru or Ecuador. There's some more incentives in Chile, but the truth of the matter is the demand creation for low carbon cement is the biggest challenge of them all. We heard it before. I think we're hearing it at developing markets as well. And so what we need to do is a huge stakeholder sort of work with all of our stakeholders for them to understand, what it means to have lower carbon cement, and sort of like also, especially for the construction industry, to really, enforce or be able to accept sort of alternative cements that are not sort of like the usual sort of Portland 1 cement, which is what we use mostly in Latin America. And so the answer is not very optimistic right now, but I think there's a whole lot of different steps that we can take. But it essentially goes back to the conclusion of the last panel, which is we need to create more demand in all of their stakeholders for an acceptance for lower carbon cement.
Thanks, Julia. Now, local collaboration, international collaboration. Sophie mentioned the challenge of raising awareness and understanding of low carbon cement and concrete products and their properties. There's still a lot of misconception. How can international collaboration or maybe GMP also work with a local industry? How we can help scale those solutions and maybe help demystify some of the misunderstandings?
Sure. I think, I mean, what we are seeing is that firstly, this basic level of awareness, which 8-10 years ago was quite challenging. I still remember, I think Regis presented, I think with Regis, 10 years back, even on the GABC to mobilize, emerging and developing countries, it was very challenging. This conversation was not to be had. Now this conversation is a real mainstream conversation where, I mean, they need to kind of, they know that there is something, we need to get into this, process. So to encourage this conversation, now we are, initiating a set of dialogues. Firstly, we had in the Latin American context last month, a dedicated conversation with partnership from FISEM, but with a host of the countries in the region led by UNIDO's Net Zero Partnership to actually convene these policymakers, on the government level, but also with the industry, because there is also a lot of, as you're saying, Jana, there is also a lot of, misconception or lack of understanding even within industry, because they are working within their, micro bubbles. You were talking about, Julia, even in your company, certain plants, they're just focused with their solutions, what they're working on. So I think there is a bit of this awareness raising both across the policy space, but also on the industry space with regards to specific technology solutions, that it's not just, one solution which is working. Then also on the financiers, it's a conversation where unless it is really large scale, big projects, financiers are not even interested in getting into this conversation or, being part of this dialogue. And that applies also for the, multilateral development banks. I mean, their ticket sizes is something like, you have a $50 million project. Okay, we are interested to kind of then see if there is a concessional grant which could be provided, if there is like, a low-cost financial solution. So I think there is also this awareness to that community which also is required. So we have been trying to kind of also pull them into this, dialogue and this conversation to make them aware about what really is the scale of, the finance challenge that we are talking about. So I think, these are three principal stakeholders. Likewise, I think in the African context, in fact, week after next, we are also having a dialogue in Addis Ababa, and it's going to be also bringing together many of the countries, again, at the three levels, like at the policymakers level, at the, industry level, but also, bringing the concessional grant providers plus like, the commercial banks who need to kind of get into an understanding of what this really transition is all about. In terms of awareness on the Far East, we somehow feel that, there is actually much more general level of awareness is higher. But again, it is a bit kind of local in their understanding and context. I mean, they're just kind of interested to kind of figure what is going to be working for them. And cement and concrete has been such a conversation which has been so, historically, it's been such a local conversation, whether it is for the policy making of it or whether it's the regulations of it, that some of these big external pushes, whether it's like, the carbon markets discussion, leakage conversation, is somehow having to kind of push, or the question on standards is shaking up this, conversation from beyond a, a local discourse to a bit of a, international discourse, which is helping like the work that we are also doing, because like, these regional dialogues that we are convening, and it's not a global dialogue, it's the regional dialogues, because at least there are some commonalities which these, parties can share, which we are seeing, value add in. I think with ITA as well, we'll be kind of collaborating. There are quite a few of the country workshops which are planned. We hope that for some of the larger markets, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Indonesia, whether it's South Africa, they require their own dedicated discussions in those in those countries. And last, I'll just touch upon, because it's been brought up several times, which is like scaling the demand, building the use cases. Regis touched upon the Olympic Village in Paris, but I think, in the emerging markets, we have many, many, many more such opportunities, whether it's, building a new MRT system, whether it's building, a new complete like urban development, center. We haven't been able to connect or make that conversation yet happen, which is the conversation across the policymakers on the industry side, along with the policymakers on the energy side and environment side, who are quite aware, with the policymakers on the urban development and housing and transportation. And this, I think, this cross-cutting nature of bringing these parties together, because I told you about the different layers of government, industry, but even like within government, these pillars, we really need to kind of now focus our convenings and those interconnected discussions to get those parties closer to this conversation. Otherwise, for them, it's, L1 tender and that's it. That's not the case. We really need to kind of creatively think about that as well.
Yeah, and I think the last point you made, Sarboji, that's music to our ears, because especially to those people who work in policymaking space, right? We need to bring sometimes different government departments together to actually facilitate that intra-governmental rather than intragovernmental cooperation to scale those projects. But we are really running out of the time, so I now want to open the floor to questions. Any questions, please raise your hand. I think we have time for 2 questions. Yeah, Ash, here.
Hello, thanks. My name is Ash Sloth. I'm with Industrious Labs. And when we think about demand creation, the largest buyer in any equation is a government. However, dominant thinking basically says that public procurement and EMDs is pretty much out of reach, because it's very hard to make the case that lower carbon materials are actually cheaper than traditional materials. I'm wondering what you think of that statement and how you would address it, especially considering the unique circumstances in EMDs, certainly not in the least the cost of capital. Thank you.
Who wants to answer that question?
Yeah. Please go ahead. You go.
Ladies first. So, yeah, Julia.
Thanks, Ash. That's a really good question. I think there's a bit of short-term, long-term in here as well. Like I said, if nothing happens, there is also a risk of being locked into assets that have the risk of becoming stranded, which in the end, obviously is bad for costs and for the environment. And I think if you can design your policy in a good way, your public procurement policy with increasingly ambitious targets that can ramp up over time, I think the impact can be really minimal, and you can spur, innovation locally, projects locally. Plus, you actually mentioned cost of capital. I agree, it's a really tricky barrier, but actually it can be a bit of a chicken and egg thing where if the certain demand is there, the project is seen as less risky, and actually the cost of capital can come down. So I do think there are a lot of options, and I think governments should actively consider those. And I think, IDDI type pledges can be a really good place to start.
I'm actually going to use an example that you just gave, sort of like, which is bringing policymakers together to see what has been made, what benefits sort of lower carbon cement infrastructure projects actually could cost less and are just as, solid, literally, for our government policymakers, and see the benefits of that. And also sort of impulse policy. And I look at UNIDO as an ally for that, because the truth of the matter is some of the barriers are just like instilled in our policymakers. They're looking at it in the same way they have for the last however many years. And so it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. I agree. It's, okay, so what are the incentives that could possibly potentially help policymakers? One of the things that we see are really sort of running pilots and making policymakers be able to look at those pilots and really see that there are benefits. And so those are things that we can think about. Again, across the geographies that we manage, we see hugely different, overtures from government policymakers. The Chileans are sort of more prone to looking at low carbon cement as something that they're interested in and willing to sort of promote. We'll see what the next Peruvian government happens, sort of like recently. And then we can also talk about sort of North America sort of as a completely different realities for us. So I'd say that there's a lot to be said about dialogue and collaboration, sort of regional, and that's a segue to UNIDO.
Thank you. I think, this is a very pertinent question. I've kind of personally also seen this back in India growing up. I mean, you mentioned, I think you touched upon, Sophie, I think fly ash. It was a late 80s thing, introduction of fly ash. There was a bit of a trust issue, does this even work, And through the 90s, I think there was enough confidence in the system that fly ash, which was basically a byproduct waste, there's so much demand for it that the whole approach in manufacturing cement underwent a transition in the 2000s. It is no longer an integrated cement plant which is based, at a limestone base. It is much closer to the cities where the power plants are based to kind of actually have the grinding mills established there. I'm digressing, but I mean, it goes to, it's on the point with regards to instilling the first, the confidence on this product, on the, low carbon cement and concrete. So there's this demonstration bit, which we still, I think in the emerging markets and developing countries, we really need to kind of establish confidence in terms of the fact that, this actually works. And then there is this is possible. Then second is, in addition to confidence, I think I did touch upon in my previous remark with regards to the delta and the incremental cost. I think through those kind of examples, we need to kind of have one or two lighthouse examples through which we actually demonstrate what is that, incremental cost if we are able to do it at scale for a project which is like, substantial in size. And this is where I think even, through Lead It, the bilateral collaboration kind of thing with India and Sweden, where some of the examples that you're getting in Sweden, you're able to kind of highlight, even if the project is not in India. I think these are examples that we really need to have a few lighthouse examples where we are able to kind of show that this is really like, not a very large difference that we are talking about. And then third, but not the least, is with regards to, again, you touched upon collaboration. I think when we are picking up with regards to the conversation with the policymakers, historically we have seen with regards to when it comes to public procurement, the departments who deal with it are not the same departments who are involved with, the policy making with regards to the product itself. And so this is where there's a bit of a disconnect, because whether it's the public works departments or, the agencies who are in the process of drafting the procurement contracts, they do not buy cement. They buy a building. They buy a bridge. And therefore, the conversation, if we are able to kind of, through the examples of those lighthouse examples, really demonstrate it's just a 5% or 8% increment in cost, which can be kind of, within the boundaries of the tendering process be incorporated or integrated with that marginal cost. This is something that we need to start showcasing with those examples and highlights. And I think we are getting there. We have some demonstration projects which are happening, but it's still very few. We really need to kind of accelerate with regards to more projects in developing countries. So I think that's my kind of last reflection, saying that we really still need more awareness building within even these communities. On the developing countries, you touched upon, Sophia, on IDDI, on the Green Public Procurement Pledge. You'll be happy to know that quite a few developing countries are now signing up, whether it's Uganda, I think most recently, or interest we have seen from Senegal and Ghana. I think, it's good to see that, countries are talking about public procurement as a thing, and they want to understand what is happening with regards to cement, concrete, overall decarbonization.
And we see it also in other initiatives in cement and concrete breakthrough that we provide Secretariat to. I'm afraid we have to leave it here. Thank you very much for your insights. I think key takeaway is that transition will not be delivered by global ambition alone. We need really locally tailored solutions and move to action and scaling those solutions. Thank you very much. Please join me.
Thanks so much, Anna, and for your excellent moderation. So we're going to have a break, a well-trailed, but finally it's arrived. We're going to actually up the pace in the next session. We've had really good sessions on the policy environment. We've looked at the built environment. We've looked at the global south. But it's going to get super sexy after the break. We're going to talk innovation, technology, and finance to really unlock our decarbonised future. So join us at exactly 11:45 British Summer Time. For those online, those in the room, you can ask questions of the panelists. See you shortly. Well, I'm just going to start talking and ask those at the back definitely to be quiet and head up. So thanks for rejoining, those online, those in the room. Plenty of time to network as well after the event. I know that's really important to do that. So as discussed, we've had 2 great sessions before the break. We're moving into our 3rd. As a parent of 3 children, I have no favorites, although this session is particularly of interest. We're going to talk about innovation, technology, and the finance that underpins that. I'm going to ask my colleague, I suppose I'm current boss, Tom Aguillo, CEO of the GCCA, to moderate this panel and walk us through this next hour. And then we're going to, super excitingly, launch our open challenge for this year. But first, what a great panel we have. Thomas, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure again. So welcome back after the break. How many people online? We're still growing. The number of connected, still the same number? Good. Good, we have about 20 people outside. I would like to call a few panelists for the panel. I mean, we talked about scale-up, development of technologies, new technologies, taking market, creating demand, etc. So we're going to talk about that during the panel. We want to understand, how we can actually close the gap of financing the development on the low carbon technologies for ahead of the next decade and for development. So I would like to call on stage Miles Halliday. You're the co-founder and managing partner of Concrete Transition Capital. You sit wherever you want. Miles came all the way from USA, n'est-ce pas? Where you have actually hosting the World Cup. Thanks for the. I mean, we are looking to get the trophy. I'm a French guy, so I'm really much looking towards to get the trophy. I would like to call on stage Shahrukh Shamin. He's the CEO of Ecor. Welcome. Thank you very much. We had a round of applause before when panelists was coming.
That's because of the jersey, isn't it? I did promise my daughter if we won on Thursday, I would wear the jersey. So that is why we're wearing it today.
I would like to welcome Zarina Alexander, co-founder and CEO of Neocrete. Welcome. And Benoît Grosbon, managing director of Just Climate. Welcome, Benoît. That's a very French name, right? So, thank you for being here with us. As I said, I think we have a very important topic. And as I said earlier, I mean, GCCA is very much working on raising on working on innovation in general. The Open Challenge is really one of our highlights. But I would like to start with a question, and probably I'll ask 2 different questions, but the same question from a financial investor point of view, and the same question from a startup point of view to see how you differ on the reaction there. We hear that when you talk to people that invest, they tell us, well, there is not enough projects to scale. And when we talk to startups, they say, well, there is not enough capital to get. So I would like to have your views on that, and I will start with you, Benoît, the view of the financial side.
All right. So you're asking an investor who's right between an investor and a company. So actually, I think the companies are right on this one. There is a real lack of patient capital overall in the investment community. And while it's also true that there is a lack of bankable projects, there are a lot of bankable projects. As a matter of fact, we have just, a few months ago now, announced the closing of the biggest raise ever in the cement industry, which was almost $150 million that we've raised for Terra CO2. So there are projects which are getting funded more than there used to be before, but it is still very, very tough. And I think the real issue is that capital was never designed to take that kind of risks. So growth equity in general was designed to take asset-light type risks, right? Effectively finance startups that are doing softwares and stuff like that, not CapEx. So there are hundreds of billions of money that is used to financing startups, but just not that kind of startups. And at Just Climate, for example, we've been somewhat pioneer in trying to divert capital to asset-heavy decarbonization and show that you can make money and make an impact at the same time in sort of these spaces. It just takes a different model. It takes a different design of how the funds are being raised, what your LPs are expecting you to deploy the money into, and the timeline you're gonna need to have in order to be able to deliver those returns. So we've been at it for now 4 years. We've raised $1.5 billion. We've deployed about $1 billion, all of that in asset-heavy stuff. There's a few other funds like ourselves that are doing the same things and are trying to demonstrate that this is possible to change the model and allocate growth equity to asset-heavy world. And I guess the rest of capital is sitting on the sideline for now and is just watching whether or not we're going to be successful at making that change in allocation style. As pioneers, of course, if we are not successful, if we effectively don't make money allocating to asset-heavy startups, then it will be very, very tough to continue financing new decarbonization technologies throughout industrials, not just cement and concrete, but throughout all industrials. If, however, we are successful, then I would expect that a lot more capital will start flowing, especially as you see a lot of capital at the moment being more careful around software investing since AI booms than it used to be. I think the real asset world will see a regain of capital allocation in the years to come. So if we are successful with our first vintages of funds across the industry, I do think there's going to be an exponential effect on allocation, including to cement and concrete. It's not tomorrow, it's probably a 3 to 5 years horizon to really see how well those funds are going to do, but it's not 20 years either. Yeah, that would be my answer.
So who's taking the answer from the startup side? I mean, Shahrukh or Zanina, you want to? Shahrukh, go ahead.
No, I think, thank you for, first of all, having me over here. So we are a Calgary-based startup in Canada, and we're going through exactly the same situation where we're trying to understand, or at least navigate this chicken and egg problem, especially with financing coming in to support, build out, like what we are trying to do when it actually, like trying to decarbonize an industry at scale, because you have solution, and at the end of the day, you need to provide the product in the market as well. So when we look at our situation, we're trying to build a plant at the moment with 200,000 tons per year capacity, which is a massive one. So when we look at that, the amount of capital and time required, it's quite a lot than what a typical startup, especially on a software side or maybe on an asset-light side, would actually require. So when we try to go out and try to raise funds from VCs, that's one thing. But when we go out and try to, again, match it with debt, that becomes really, really challenging. Because the one common thing that we get from banks, traditional banks, is obviously that we are too risky at the moment. The cost of capital with other private lenders are way too high for us to have like something as a bankable project. And then at the end of the day, when we try to go out and raise money, obviously the VCs or CVCs would have their own requirement that we need to have sufficient amount of capital to actually build out rather than having like 70% build and then the plant is stuck. So that's been a challenge, and we're trying to find a solution. There's been a lot of options available, especially with being in Canada. It brings a lot of privileges, and especially with Government of Canada being provincial or federal both has provided us massive amount of support, especially on the non-dilutive grant funding that does help in that plant build out. But again, this has been an ongoing challenge for a startup like us where you're trying to build out something, but at the end of the day, the availability of capital and the timely availability of capital is always a challenge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you have something to add on that one, you know, we go to, okay, go.
And I think because the investors said that the companies are right, I'm supposed to say that the investors are right, but I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say that maybe I can understand both sides, and I think we just need to reconcile the definition of the bankable project now. And how, and then we need to understand how patient the patient capital need to be, And to do that, we just need to really reconcile it with a common metric. And one of the common metric that it should be there is how fast any startup or clean tech startup can scale. And that way, if we introduce that metric, then any bankable clean tech project should have that as the key metric. And that way, that patient capital doesn't need to be that patient. Then we can unlock the financials, and we can unlock the comparison between the clean tech startup that is easier. And lastly, as a startup, we're not just looking for funding to investors or banks, so we look for any other opportunity to fund our startups. And before we unlock the trillions available from the VC funds, why don't we unlock a few billions coming from CBAM, for example? Because currently there is no plans to reutilize these proceeds to go back into decarbonizing those industries that are penalized for being carbon intensive. So if we at least start using that funding for clean techs that are helping solve those problems, then we wouldn't just purely rely on the debt financing and investment financing. So that's it.
Maybe Miles, a word on that?
I agree with Benoit. He pinned it. I think at the end of the day, we have to prove that this is an investable industry, and that's why sometimes it's really scary to be where we're at. And like we're trying to make bets that we know cannot fail, because if we fail, that's a big problem.
So on top of capital, I mean, what are the other challenges that are faced by you guys on ramping up, on scaling up, etc.? What do you say? I mean, maybe we have a round of each of you. I mean, I know maybe Benoit, we start this way as well. You first on that one?
No, I actually would like the startups do it first. They're the ones doing it. So okay. I'm happy to talk about it, but like let's hear them talk about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, one obvious one that was discussed today a little bit was the forever outdated standards and building codes, and that needs to be performance-based where possible. That would really accelerate our adoption. In Europe, it's particularly difficult because that's the market we're currently entering. We're based in New Zealand, so we are expanding to Europe and finding it very slow. But outside of the investments and everything for a scale-up business like ours, it's the way that the whole industry operates is not very startup friendly in the way of procurement. Because when we try to scale, we don't always have enough working capital, because we first provide the service, and then it gets paid in 3 to 6 months for that. So then funding that working capital is really hard from the debt financing, because we're a startup, it's really hard for us to go to the bank for it. So that provides an unnecessary financial pressures just for the working capital. For a successful startup, there's a demand for it, there's a growth for it. And I think that's one of the things that's like maybe someone can address, and who would address that would be the biggest consumers of green building, which are usually governments in every country. And then instead of doing that post-payment, maybe they can start doing prepayment for clean tech, and then remove those unnecessary financial pressures on scaling and working capital for startups. We also don't have bargaining powers very often with our customers as well to like renegotiate the payment terms. So yeah, I'd say that.
Yes. What do you say, Shauk?
No, certainly. I think Zarina did point out some really, really important points, but there's another aspect of what we are also trying to understand is the government procurement process. So there's one thing about procurement, but there's another thing about acceptance. So when we look at, and both are interrelated and interconnected up to a certain extent. So when we talk about like specific our materials going into construction jobs, being it, again, more government focused, roads, bridges, and whatnot, what we do see is that MOT or DOTs in general, the timeline for any new product acceptance is generally in multi-years kind of like phases, like 2-3 years minimum if everything goes well, which seldom goes well. So in that situations, what happens, like we are now on hook for at least 3 years minimum to be able to sell directly to the government. So now we need middlemen and them again kind of coming in with their own risk appetite, trying to put some sort of discount on it to make sure that they can sell in additional markets where right now we cannot sell. So having that streamlined channel for at least procurement for us becomes difficult. working capital is certainly a good point. At the end of the day, when we look at our own deployment model, the good thing is, like in Canada, again, you should come to Canada, where there's a lot of options available over there, at least on the working capital side, where if you can show, obviously, with the bankability of the project and offtake agreement specifically, which we are going very heavy on to have take-or-pay offtake, the risk goes down, and I 100% agree with a lot of debt providers that obviously at the end of the day, it's always about the risk matrix and how do you mitigate it. And if we have a good kind of like platform for that and a pathway, it becomes easy relatively, but I'm not saying that it just makes our life really easy. It's still difficult being a startup, and the cash crunch on the end of the day, it's also real because we are not funding this project from our cash flow. We're generally just basically putting entire of our raised money into building this plant, and everything becomes too difficult to further extend the runway, specifically if there is cost overrun happening, if there's obviously delays on the approval side. So there are a bunch of stuff that can go wrong in a startup, and it does go wrong.
These are all great. A couple additional ones that I can think of. One is the people that are actually pouring it. We forget about this all the time. We talk about policy, we talk about offtake agreements, we're talking about how the government procures, all of these different things, and we forget about the people who are actually pouring the thing, and we forget to train them. In the US, we rolled out a new type of cement and concrete in the last few years, and we didn't train the workforce well enough to do it. So I think that we have to remember that my superintendent when I built my building was named Kevin. He was this really large dude, and when we had concrete pour days, remember that we have like 50 or 60 people out there in a project. If that goes wrong, we're in a lot of trouble. So let's continue to remember that like the people at the end of the day who have to pour it need to be trained. The other area that's a really funny one that we don't think about a lot, which is in the ready mix facilities, the amount of storage and silos that we have. In Europe, you have much more blended cements. In the US, we don't have as much blended cements. So when we start talking about all these different SEMs, well, we have to have a silo storage. That's just one additional blocker that we have as we go forward.
Actually, just on that note, I think Miles did put a really important point out there because finish is incredibly important in concrete. And this was actually a first-hand comment that I got when I was actually trying to go out with my BD person specifically to sell our stuff in the market. And one thing that we got is a pretty harsh comment and a reality check for us as well, that when we come from a mindset of, oh, this is a great product, and it performs on strength, performance, or even durability, for example, and the cost, one thing that nobody kind of pays attention is the finish. If finish is not there, it becomes very difficult, especially for the pouring job to actually happen in more kind of successful manner, and that has a direct impact for the further jobs and the approval for stuff that we are providing. So a really good point that startups typically miss. Yeah,
absolutely. Coming back to you, actually, Miles, I mean, tell us a little bit about CTC, Concrete Transition Capital, and how do you actually, in your mandate, in your strategy, how do you make the choice of technologies versus another, the vision, the opportunities that you have here, I mean, as an investor?
Sure. I mean, the first thing we ask the GCCA, because they're the ones that ultimately have to buy these things from us. I always laugh at Thomas. I just do whatever Thomas tells me. Which, by the way, this guy has one of the hardest jobs in the world, is to keep all of those cement companies in line. Could you imagine? They're like 70 of them up there, and he has to keep them all moving together. So, this guy, he has the weight of his world on his shoulders some days. So, and he also travels all the time. Concrete Transition Capital was created between myself and my business partner, Genevieve, to ultimately finance and scale any type of infrastructure we need for cement and concrete. And we're going to start in the US, Canada, UK, and Europe. And we're working on the non-dilutive debt side, which is the really scary side, which, I mean, the equity side's scary too. Shouldn't say that. But like the debt side is really where we found the hole. So that's what we were working on. And as part of our work, we had to really define, how do we think about which technologies we ultimately want to scale. And I've been working on this for about 3 or 4 years. And I'm really interested to hear what Benoit has to say too, because he's also done this research. So hopefully we didn't put the same prompt into ChatGPT and get the same answer. But we look across 4 different things on the technology side. The first thing is function. I'll name them: function, scale, carbon, and price. In terms of functionality, it has to work. This cannot be a product that cannot work. And also the functionality is going to be different depending on where we're using it. In the last panel, they made the comment about, or at least one of the panels this morning, we talked about how the material, we want to have a co-benefit, not just carbon. And that can depend on the type of concrete placement that we're doing. So if we're doing a concrete placement in the ocean and salt water, there might be an SCM that works really well there. If we're going vertical or we're doing it in a foundation, there might be a benefit there. So it's not universal how we see these low carbon technologies working, but we always want to be looking for something that not only is as good as what we have today, but potentially better than the solutions we have, depending on what you're pouring. In terms of scale, this is a 4 billion ton problem. It's not going away anytime soon. So if you come to us with a technology that has a 1 million ton potential, we probably don't care. We don't require a gigaton like Breakthrough has in the past, but we tend to settle around 100 million tons. It's like if you can squint and say, I can get to 100 million tons annually, because we think that there are going to be dozens of solutions, but not hundreds of solutions in this space. The third is carbon. We want it to be low carbon, of course, but the way that we describe carbon is it needs to be low carbon itself, but we don't expect the technology to be taking out the entire carbon in concrete. We think that the way we're going to decarbonize concrete is piecemeal. It's going to be a bunch of different technologies stacking together. So we really want to see that the solution we're looking at is going to work with other solutions. So the SCM has to play well with other SCMs. Maybe like fuels can work with different groups. Obviously, CCS can work with any of these things. So we really think about stacking the solution to get there. And then the last thing we think about, obviously, as a debt financer, is price. We really want to see technologies come down in price. Most of these technologies are going to be deployed in the global south where there is no green premium. So we really want to see the long-term price of these technologies approach the marginal cost of production of clinker, which is really low if you haven't looked at it before. And then we want to exhaust all of those before we start talking about CCS, which is likely going to be at the very end and definitely part of the problem. Oh, sorry, part of the solution.
Thanks. Thanks for that. Yeah, but it takes time. So, you have to start early on CCS. That's always what we are saying. But yes, part of the solution, or not the first part.
We agree. We got to get that technology in place. I mean, it's great to see a bunch of different groups working on it.
Moving on to you, Benoit, back to you. So you mentioned it. I mean, Just Climate, you just actually closed a Series B investment in Terra CO2, about $150 million. What are your investment criteria? I mean, how do you define, whether a startup is good for investment when there is basically no market, no price, or little market or little price on a lot of questions around it?
Right. All right. So we probably have 5 criteria when it comes to cement and concrete. But we are generalist investors, so we invest across industrials. But for cement and concrete specifically, I would say the first one is commonly available feedstock. That's just not an industry in which product travels, right? So the feedstock cannot travel much either. And that's kind of non-negotiable. So we wouldn't do niche type feedstocks, although they could make a lot of sense and they could have a place, but because we're trying to back transformational technologies that can really have a big impact on emissions of the whole sector, we would look only for technologies which can lever commonly available feedstocks. Second, on cost, I mean, Miles just mentioned this, we would really struggle to back a technology which needs to live on subsidies and green premiums. We can do it in some industries where those are more sort of mainstream, but in the world of cement and concrete, we struggle to believe that those can be sustainable. The buyers, the sort of ready-mix concrete players, for example, are so fragmented and often small companies, their priority is not carbon, right? Their priority is price. And so we feel that it's very hard to back a technology which at least doesn't have a clear cost down trajectory to come at least to parity. Thirdly, I would say we wouldn't back a technology that would want to go head-to-head against the majors. And And again, that's industry specific, because there are industries where that's absolutely fine. You take the adjacent steel industry, someone can go and compete with any major with a new technology, greenfield type play, because it's a globally traded commodity. But cement is not a globally traded commodity, and going head to head against the big guys is a death warrant. Because they control the sales channels at the local level, and if they want to crush you, they can. So you have to work with them, and you have to offer them a solution to their own problems. I think that's much more likely to succeed in that specific industry. And there are many companies that are thinking that way, and that works very well. Fourthly, I would say, and that's more just climate-related mandate, technologies which product is already ready to go from a regulatory point of view. So we would struggle to back a fundamentally innovative chemistry that requires a decade to go through all the right approvals to be used into the structural concrete. There are other investors that would be willing to do that, and that's great. But because we are trying to back technologies which can have a lot of impact as quickly as possible, we very much believe in the time value of carbon. We are focusing on those that are sort of ready for market, or nearly ready for market. And lastly, and that touches to the previous panel, we would only invest in companies which we think can scale in emerging markets. And the criteria here, in my view, is you need something that looks like the status quo. You need something, technology that uses the same kind of equipment, the same kind of temperature, that's kind of understood easily by an existing operation so that they can switch to that other way of doing it. And that feels a lot more scalable anywhere than a very high-tech new chemistry in a controlled environment where you need effectively completely different people with different skills to make the same product, right? So that's how I sort of think about that market. And of course, when you apply those filters, there isn't many companies that are still standing, unfortunately, today yet. But at least that's how we look at the world. And if there are startups in the room here, perhaps that can be helpful for you to know that it's how growth equity thinks about it at the moment. I mean, we have quite a few co-shareholders in Terra, and I know they think in a similar way. So I sort of speak on their behalf as well, to some extent. Of course, it's not perfect, and other people might have different views, but I think those are key, 5 very, very key criteria. I don't know if that resonates with you guys. I'd love to hear that, actually.
Actually, yes. I mean, moving to you guys, we'll start with you, Zarina. You're from Neocrete. You tell us a little bit more about Neocrete. The question is, you've been through this, what they call the valley of death, right? It's, how do you get out of the laboratory to something that is actually proven on the pitch? What is your experience with that? On the convincing the investor, making sure that you can actually make that happen.
Yeah, thank you. So I just, listening to the colleagues, I just realized why I'm on stage today is because we're meeting all of this criteria for an investable project. I think we were part of the GCCA Inovanti Open Challenge a couple of years ago, and some of the best advice that I received as part of that consortium was that the industry told us that on top of providing carbon benefits, make sure you provide economic benefits if you want to scale and you want to scale fast. Right, so we are an additive that boosts the performance of low-performing SCMs that are widely available and abundant around the world. And so we spent 2 years after that reformulating our additive to make sure we provide direct economic benefit to our customers. And so we reduced the cost per MPA and carbon and dollar cost per MPA as compared to conventional cement. Not as compared to CCU, which is really not hard, but compared to existing controls that they have. And So yeah, we since scaled and went to, we're based in New Zealand, but we scaled in Southeast Asia, and that currently covers most of our pilot plant capacity. Our first customer, who's currently in the audience over there, so ask all the tough questions. And when you reduce costs and when you provide economic benefit, then in any jurisdiction you go to, the commercial negotiations make it very, very easy. And so even with the scale that we currently have with the customer negotiations, with the port project negotiations, with the port authorities where like they're redeveloping a big port where they're using Neocrete at the moment, all those negotiations were going down to unit economics, as well as carbon reductions, as well as recycling the existing waste in the country. So I think that was the biggest take, and this, in every country there are different systems in place, there are different financial systems in place, different innovation grants, and all sorts of different startups, but one metric that actually breaks the barriers is the unit economics, and that's how we manage to scale, and hopefully we'll continue scaling in Europe now, because I'm sure we can provide more value here than in Asia, because the difference between the cost of cement and the cost of SCM is much larger here.
Excellent. So I'm moving to you, Shahrukh. So on Vicor, as we said, maybe you tell us a little bit more about the company, the startup. I mean, we are named Canadian National Winner in the Outstanding Project in the Net Zero Industry Awards in 2025. You've built this first-of-a-kind 200,000 tons plant for cement substitute in North America. A little bit the same question to you. What beyond the financial support, we've been addressing that quite a lot. I mean, what in addition can you take from government? We said it, I mean, from the buying, but also from the reward, your recognition, etc. And how does this help you to scale your operation? You have also extended to Global South. So going to Global South, what does it take? And there where the green premium is not necessarily, is even less obvious, let's put it like this, how did you manage?
No, thanks, Thomas, for the questions. Loaded one, for sure. I'll start with the background of Envicor. So we started back in 2019. We're a SCM company. We produce SCM from wide variety of mineral resources. Like we can take recycled concrete or construction demolition waste, I should say, to mining tailings, pretty much naturally occurring stuff, industrial byproduct. And to date, we have tested close to 51 or 52 mineral stream coming from diverse background all around the world. We have a lot of partners, so it's been obviously a lot of learning for us as well. How do we position ourselves as a startup, especially in this industry? And a massive thanks to GCCA. Like a couple of years back when we were participating with Neocrete in the GCCA in a 1D challenge, that's when it opened up massive opportunities for us. We have some amazing backers from early days, Heidelberg Materials being an investor, CSN from Brazil, and so on and so forth. And now we're bringing a few more partners from cement industry. So we really understand the value of having a big player by your side that enables you to bring your technology to the market in more accelerated manner. Talking about the process, like I think with Benoit's point, we're meeting a lot of those. So I think, Zarina, you're right. I think that's the only reason we are here. Capital is important for sure for any massive build out, but when we look at how exactly we are building and scaling, so when we developed the technology, we had this thesis in mind that we have to make it scalable. We cannot build something that's going to be 10,000 or 100,000 of tons every year and maxing out at that. It's all about market demand. If you can meet the market demand, certainly if it's 1 million ton in certain regions of this world, or maybe in North America where we are doing 200,000 tons every year, but still a big volume. But it's always dependent on the market. And geography is incredibly important. Local feedstock, local target, that's the key. If you start moving material, it's going to be quite expensive and it's going to eat up your margin and you're done. So we have considered all of these points into development and also the next stage of our technology. We piloted our initial process with two major players, one in Thailand with Siam Cement Group, again, thanks to GCCA for that, because the whole conversation started with Siam Cement was during that 1D challenge, and the conversation led to pretty much a pilot in their own facility utilizing existing infrastructure. So literally our cost of doing pilot from couple $1 million went down to only few, like tenths of thousands of dollars. So that was a big reduction. We were able to meet the requirements set by our customers, so that again talks about the efficacy and scalability of the process and application to existing infrastructure. Then we scaled the same process in Belgium and Europe with Heidelberg Materials running in completely different kind of model. With the feedstock, we went with construction demolition waste, which is right now a big challenge from a recycle perspective, and we just converted that into an SCM, replaced 25% cement in a concrete mix successfully. So these were some of the things that we actually proved that the technology is viable, and now the next step is obviously scale up. So based on our own kind of like pathways and project pipeline, we believe that Canada is our first, it's our home, so we're gonna do this first over there. But the plan is obviously to scale in multiple jurisdictions. We're going to start with actually Canada, second US, third Europe, and then Asia. And most importantly, we have to understand, especially on the pricing, as you mentioned about Global South, we have to understand we don't rely on specific green premiums at all. We are at cost parity with fly ash, so it literally puts us in a more competitive position with a lot of other products in the market right now. But ultimately, the regulation, the kind of operations in a completely different jurisdictions and support that's available from labor workforce, that's going to be critical. Even though we do work with like existing infrastructure, so we don't need like enhanced or really different skill set, we can literally work with somebody who has worked in a cement plant and can operate a ball mill or a kiln, from that matter of fact. So ultimately, it's the availability of workforce, the support from the local ecosystem, be it on a municipal level, all the way to the government, the federal or even central government, and then subsequently going from there. But we certainly have plans in the next 10 years, have 4 more facilities that can do at least 1 million tons each on an annual basis. Yeah.
Quite a development indeed. Congratulations for that. Zarina, we didn't address too much what's next for you. So what's next for the Oakrit, and where do you see your future?
Well, we would like to have a lot of impact, and there's no impact without scale. So we're definitely now focused on scaling up our technology, providing those carbon and economic benefits to our customers around the world. As I mentioned, we are now moving to Europe for those reasons, and we're currently doing trials across multiple customers, and a scaled pilot is scheduled for like end of this year with Amazon, and we have a few bigger customers potentially trialing the product as we speak in different parts of the world as well as Europe. So what we would like to do next, I think for us, we solved the hardest problem in climate, that was profitability. So the next hard problem to solve is how do we scale really fast, and how do we provide and share all these benefits with the industry. And I think when I was talking in the beginning about having the criteria of being able to scale and scale fast is now going to be the key for any innovation. And it's not a question anymore about can we decarbonize cement. The question is, can we decarbonize it fast enough to provide a meaningful impact? And just for scale, our pilot took less than 6 months to set up. We were producing already within 9 months, shipping overseas to our first and favorite customer in Southeast Asia from New Zealand, and still saving costs. So if we can replicate that model at a scale across 4 billion tons and working with other startups like different emerging SCMs, then we can absolutely achieve significant reduction in carbon across the industry. And I absolutely believe that even though it's a huge industry, it's a very tightly knit industry, and cement and concrete could be the first industry to fully decarbonize and lead the way.
That's, I like, this is also our belief. I would like to turn to the audience if there is any question. I mean, I have a couple of questions left, 20 minutes, but I'm happy if you guys come with question. There is 2 questions there. one over there in the back. There is only 4 mics. We're going to be shortage.
Oh, thank you. Jimmy Barrett-Thorne, Technical Director for WSP in the UK. I think following on from a couple of points from Zarina and Benoit, really on the existing supply chain and how you have to integrate to that, and whether you see that's a fundamental blocker to scale without government intervention and regulation to overcome that.
All right, so no, I don't think government intervention is an absolute blocker, or the lack of government intervention would be an absolute blocker, because generally I believe that for an industry to really take off, it needs to be able to do it on its own feet. I think it can be useful to help a cost down trajectory when it is too expensive at first to make something. We've seen, for example, in wind, it's been absolutely instrumental. In solar, it's been absolutely instrumental. I don't know, I'm not certain that this is what's required in the world of cement, because for most of the technologies I've seen, cost down wasn't necessarily the issue. Some are just way more expensive, and there's very little they can do to change that, so they need a market to pay huge premiums, and I think they will struggle. And some others, they have enough of a clear cost down trajectory that they can explain clearly enough that an investor would be willing to back it. I think incentives are, rather than incentives, what's important is to penalize the emitters. That is, I think, more powerful. So, you know, the whole ETS and CBAM concept, because that will help raise prices and make a lot of technologies which today are struggling to be economical become economical. So yeah, rather than incentives, I think the solution might be more into the opposite of incentives, but on the emitters, yeah.
We have another question there.
Hi there, I'm Elle Johnson from Richmond International University. My question was for Miles. You mentioned that the technologies your company adapts, you want them to have co-benefits besides just carbon reduction. So my question is, what environmental benefits do you see is most conducive and complementary to carbon reduction in cement production specifically? And so which one of those environmental benefits do you think is most feasible for companies like yours to contribute to as well?
So generally, when I'm talking about co-benefits, I'm generally talking about the co-benefits to concrete itself. So actually wasn't thinking about it in the environmental side, but if we do go down that road, I mean, one of the ways we get rid of tires in the world is that we burn them in kilns, so that's exciting. We could probably slow that down a little bit. What other, here's an interesting one that I've learned a lot recently about. Sand. So we have a big problem with sand. So we use a massive amount of sand in concrete, and one of the major hammers that we have, and we've seen this a couple of places in the world, is if we could figure out how to utilize the CO2 and bind it to a material and produce sand, that would be amazing, because sand is going to become an issue for the concrete industry over the next 2 decades. And so I would say that would probably be the biggest co-benefit that I would see.
From chemistry point of view, it's easier to turn back into cement actually and clinker.
What's that?
It's easier to turn CO2 back into cement and clinker.
Yes, but the issue with that is that we only produce so much cement a year. The ability for us to consume it into aggregates is way bigger. But yes, we can put it back into cement. Yes, we've seen that too. But yeah, we see both. But the sand issue is a huge one. We have to figure that one out. And if we could, I mean, yes, you could. I'm trying to think of I'm thinking of all of my conversations I've had the last 2 weeks. Yes, and it's really not an issue of or, it's an issue of and.
And do you know that you can use recycled plastic and turn it into sand? And if the world was doing that, then per some calculations that need to be checked by ChatGPT, is that the world will, if the world starts using recycled plastic as sand in concrete, it will run out of all the waste plastic in 7 months.
Oh, we need to get some testing on that. I think that's like, I mean, I'm curious, then it becomes the question of like, when you have recycled sand, does it bind with the aggregate? So he's going to start questioning that real fast. But like this comes back to one of my biggest issue, which I'm still waiting for Santa to deliver this, which I mentioned recently. I want a testing database of all this, because all these ideas are fantastic, but we have to test it, and we have to test them with each other. And like, unless we do that, they were just ideas, and we can kick them around in cocktail conversations, but we need to test these things. Maybe the Avandi challenge is going to be testing. I don't know.
Any other question? Here, Adam.
Hi, Adam Auer, Cement Association of Canada. I want to pick up on a point that Miles made at the beginning about pushback that he's seeing in the US against some lower carbon cements because those who are actually placing that material haven't been properly trained. We're seeing similar blowback come across the border into Canada. And so, I want to put the question to Sharuk and Zarina about who do you think ultimately bears accountability for training sort of the end user of these novel materials, which we may know from what I guess we call labcrete is as or potentially more performative, but maybe requires a stricter adherence to best practices in terms of placement and finishing.
I could start. That is a very good question. I think it is a shared responsibility between the inventors of that new technology, because they know the best firsthand how it works and how it doesn't work and how to use it, and also the customer, which is the ready-mix plant, because ultimately they are the ones bearing the most risk of a failed product at the end of the day. And then, and I think that problem is actually, it's both, we need to approach it from both sides. Yes, absolutely, we need to train everyone to use the new technology, but on the other hand, we need to make our product very easy to use. So in our R&D testing program, one part of it is actually says batcher friendly. That means that that's basically all fresh concrete properties. Can it be pumped? Can it be placed? So strength and durability, it's the easy part for us. The batcher friendliness is the hard part, because the whole industry is trained. It's like millions and millions of people are trained to use conventional cement. And we don't want to retrain the whole industry with completely new practices and new chemistry and new behaviors. So I think it's responsibility of a startup is actually to make it as user-friendly as possible in the first place, so that we don't need to disrupt the industry and work together with the industry and not against it. But also, of course, there'll be some kind of training, and we're hoping our customers who are benefiting from it and economically as well would put some effort into retraining a little bit the industry and the end user.
And in that, if I may add, you need also to consider global south in that, the technology and the ability of the people there, the do-it-yourself builders, etc. They need to be able to integrate these technologies on their side.
Absolutely. I think I'll echo what Zarina is mentioning, but the way that we look at it from a liability standpoint, as a startup, I want to stay away from it because we know how difficult it could be. But then, when we talk about shared responsibility, it's absolutely on startups. We need to make sure that the product that we are creating, especially like, for example, if it's already in a bucket that's been recognized by the industry, calcined clay, for example, LC3, it's becoming quite predominant, even in Global South, where there's been a lot of projects on LC3. And we understand that as a startup, if it's kind of like getting into that bucket, there is some sort of like shared information available that we can piggyback on from a finish, from pouring, from pumpability, durability, and so on and so forth. But then when it's a completely new product, we have to be in a situation, and that's what we typically do, is when we're going after, let's say, an unconventional feedstock, mining tailings, for example, and an associated SCM that comes out of it, we need to make sure that we can do this job way early on before the actual product is in the market. So we talk to a lot of ready-mix, ready-mix, precast, and even with cement companies. So the way that we have actually arranged our business model is like we have this model that we can sell directly to cement companies, and they have obviously a lot of these channels where they train their existing workforce with these new SCMs. when we're directly going into the market, obviously the idea is before the product is in the market, we need to have multiple trials. We have to do actual pouring job that gives a feel of the material. Because there is one thing what Zarina mentioned, it's the easy part is strength and durability, but the hard part is actually train the user of it. And you cannot do it without giving them the feel of material way early on when the product is in the market. So that's how we typically do it, but from a responsibility perspective, we 100% agree that as a startup, we need to be exactly in this game. There has to be skin from both the sides, both us as a startup where we are providing the raw material, and at the same time, the end customers to come together to the table and start thinking about, oh, there is something that we need to do. If there is any sort of like problem, there is recommendation, we can always go back, fix it, and then provide a new iteration of that product. So that's how we typically do it. And we've seen good success on that, because when you talk to cement companies, you send them batches of samples, kind of like month after month, to give them a good understanding how exactly the variability is being taken care of, because that's the biggest challenge. Even with the rammed ash or reclaimed ash right now in Canada, it's been a really big topic, which I've been part of, which talks about like how batch-to-batch variability is impacting the entire flow and pouring job. So we understand that if you can take care of that problem, it does talk about like solving a big challenge on the variability side. So how do you do that? Just to make sure that you are giving them a good understanding of what the product's going to be when it actually hits the market from a commercial timeline perspective. So it's always a give or take relationship. And we provide a lot of information. We always require to get a feedback on our product. And it certainly helps a lot in the conversation, yeah.
Thank you for this. One more question.
Hello, everyone. Agni Argiri from WFO, World Forum for Offshore Wind. Are you at all involved, both startups and investors, at the offshore wind industry and specifically floating offshore wind industry? Because concrete is a technology that really needs to be scaled up, and we really need to move forward with decarbonization, and this is something that we lack right now.
I can probably start because it's in our buildings in New Zealand, we have a lot of different startups, and one of the other startups was that floating power generating battery, some kind of like just getting that generates power from the waves and then stores it and then distributes it later on. So for that, they needed concrete. So we have been approached by a few non-startups, like existing companies and everything, and I think our product is really well designed for it. We haven't been used in there, but because of its durability and water impermeability and chloride impermeability properties, absolutely Neocrete is designed for that and for a few other technologies. So yeah, we would love to try it. And I think there's like way more demand for it in Europe, so we'll have a look. And also it's like mass concrete pours for wind power plants, for example. That's another area for us. But we're trying to first make it better friendly across all types of different concretes as the biggest market.
In terms of, so your question is like wind industry, like getting involved. So one of the issues that we have is that any given one project isn't big enough. So even when you think about like a big wind farm, like you're not going to utilize enough cement to change an entire system. So that's one of the issues that we have to do is figure out how to aggregate this. So you need to get together with the other projects that are going on. So this is my plug for Daniel. Where's Daniel? Daniel's still here. There he is. Daniel at World Economic Forum is starting work on regional decarbonization with cities. So you guys can be a part of the solution, but you can't be the solution. So we need to have your project and then another project and another project and another project. And oh, by the way, we need to have the cities and the municipalities also procure low carbon concrete. So if you guys all pull together, we can get it. But just one wind farm we don't care. It's just not big enough.
Thank you.
Good. Before we close, I have one more question, but I would like to put on the spot. We have two startups in the room, Quentin from Alitic and Elliot and Laura from Cocoon Carbon. So if you're in the room, I just want to have a quick pitch. That's the 1 minute guy, where you tell us what you're doing,
Yes.
and you tell us whether you agree or not with what was said, and whether this reflects your difficulties, challenge, and opportunities.
Yes, I very much agree. I think it takes
Please
a long
remind
time.
where you come from on your startup.
So my name is Quentin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alithic. We make a carbon negative cement, for an SCM. It's a spin-out from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I fully agree with what everything has been said on the panel. In many ways, we're similar to NV Core in the sense that we take different feedstocks, mineral wastes, among others. We carbonate them using CO2 either from flue gases or from the air, hence the negative carbon of our SCM, and we upgrade these feedstocks into an SCM. We're part of the GCCA Novandi, the cohort of 2025, and I can only say that Innovandi is very helpful in engaging with the cement and the concrete industry, and to also progressing the technology on the technical front, but also on the commercial side.
Super. We are very happy, guys, and very proud of our startups anyway. From Cocoon Carbon, yeah.
Hi. So I'm Laura from Cocoon Carbon. I work as a product development lead, and so differently from you guys, we focus on mainly one source to develop an SCM. So we are focusing on electrical furnace slag, which is a very big new and, well, it's not new, but it will be more and more abundant and replacing blast furnace slag. So what we're developing is a water granulation process, which it's the same process that is applied to blast furnace slag, but it requires there are more challenges with electrical furnace slag. It requires some chemical adjustments, so that's where our technology sits. It's, however, a very big feedstock and also meant to increase. So that's where we want to be in this market for a new SCM. We have a pilot plant in the US, even if we're a UK-based company. So we will look forward to find solutions for the UK and Europe too, but we're starting to commercialize hopefully soon in the US. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So great to see. I mean, there is really, how do you say that, momentum and dynamic on the GCCA, the dark horse. You know, the Americans believe that they will win the World Cup. So.
Trump told us we're winning. Yeah. I mean, we all know we're winning. We just don't know how.
We'll see that. So I wanted to say, and that was actually a segue, but he broke my transition. A guy called Concrete Transition, I mean. So we are very proud of our startups, and with that, I would like to launch, actually, maybe stay on stage here, but we would like to launch the 2026 Open Challenge. We have a little movie for that. We have a little announcement. And Paul, if you want to drive us there, and maybe we have, after that, a very short conversation. I have one more question for you guys.
Actually, just before we do the launch video, Tom wants to speak a little bit about the Open Challenge, just to give a bit of context of what that is. And we have a few organizations in the room, startups, that have gone through that. So just a bit of context first, Tom, I think.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks. That's the part I missed, actually. I can always blame it on Miles. Always blame the Americans. So, no, yeah, I mean, the Open Challenge is really something quite unique. I mean, we like it very much. So, I mean, that's what we call an accelerator, right? We have been working quite some times on I'm wondering if these are the pictures from the Open Challenge. Actually, this was the demo day. Yeah, this was the demo day in Düsseldorf. The idea of the Open Challenge is really to bring actually technologies and to understand. I mean, we've been talking the Valley of Dev before. To understand how we can help startup actually to bridge that moment, so that we accelerate the moment where an idea, a pilot, actually more than an idea, a pilot, something that has been demonstrated in a lab, can actually meet market and can be actually tested on be spar by the reality of the industry, including all these elements that you have mentioned. I have taken note actually on your 5 different criteria, and I think they are actually extremely excellent, and they are really matching what we ask the startup when we are talking about the Innovandi Open Challenge. I mean, make sure that you can locally based, that there is a feedstock, that the cost is okay, that this will develop in a positive side. No, against the major, that this I leave this to you. That was for your comments. The regulation on how that's involved in the regulation, how we can, well, but most importantly, the ability to scale and the ability to scale in the emerging and developing countries. And this is what we have seen, and that's why indeed these people are here, is because you have actually ticked that box and make it prove and demonstrate that these things can be moved forward. So you see the 15 startups we've been working on over the years. They are covering very different type of technology. It's not all about SCM. We also have carbon capture things. We have also bio solutions. We have drying solution with Kumtech, and of course a lot of SCMs on things that makes it interesting by the company. So very happy about how this has developed over time. We are in 2025 in discussion with 4 consortium, and we will have the demo day. Where will be the demo day? In Dubai, actually. In Dubai, during our annual event in Dubai. That will be something quite interesting. So now, we launch. Let's go.
Are you a startup working on AI solutions for low-carbon cement and concrete to transform the way we build, create, and live? If so, we're looking for you to join the Innovandi Open Challenge 2026. We're searching for bold, brilliant startups working on AI solutions that could help us decarbonize the cement and concrete value chain. Under the Open Challenge, successful startups will have the opportunity to partner with the largest cement producers in the world, who will provide mentoring and resources to accelerate their technology. Concrete is the world's most used material after water, and it will continue to be essential for global growth and for overcoming many of the challenges we face, such as climate change, adaptation, and the need for greater resilience. This is your opportunity to collaborate with industry leaders, scale up your technology, and help the cement and concrete industry shape a more sustainable future. If you are a startup working on AI solutions for low-carbon cement and concrete, apply now.
So we're up and running with the Open Challenge for this year. It is genuinely unique. We use that word a lot. There is not another industry that collaborates in such a way that has this level of sort of accelerator for startups. And I think we can be very proud of ourselves and our partners for doing that. And you've heard many of the startups that have gone through the challenge over the course of the years. How do you apply? Well, you just go online. Simple as that. Go online. The website is now open. There's a QR code in a moment that I will share. So we're open now. The deadline for applications is August, is 20th of August. And then there's a bit of a refinement process that we go through with our members, of course, who provide the expertise, all building towards a pitch day later in September. And then, of course, they come back to present at the demo day in June next year. So the challenge itself, of course, you've heard, is on artificial intelligence, solutions for cement and concrete manufacturing. Of course, winning technologies are expected to build on the AI work that the industry is already undertaking on things such as optimizing mixes, enhancing manufacturing processes. So things around, we're looking for things around low clinker and low carbon materials, around kiln fuel energy and process optimization, production control, as well as operational elements as well. So CO2 measurements, of course, come into the role, as well as product carbon footprint optimization. So you can find all the details for those online. I know there's many of us joining us for the challenge. Here's a QR code coming up. Have I gone past the QR code, anybody? Somebody help me out here. There it is. There it is. So while you're reflecting on that and taking a picture online, I'm going to ask a couple of questions we've got people that went through from Envicor and Neocrete. Just a bit of advice about the application process and why they should join. I'll ask you about the application process, if you don't mind. And then we'll
certainly. For us, I think it was pretty straightforward. Like, it was just to blur what exactly we were doing. The startup, at that point of time in 2023, the focus was on low carbon SCMs or cements in general. So I think it was just talking about the technology in very succinct, but at the same time, objective manner. So talking exactly about the problem, the solution that we are putting, how exactly we're solving it, the plans to scale up, and the deployment plans, obviously, if you have one, and just submit that. And I think that was, for us at least, it was quite straightforward. We got the call. We had multiple rounds of discussion with the end consumers, or in general, in this case, cement partners. And we were able to form the consortium in a fairly timely basis with 9 cement companies as a partner. Yeah.
Fantastic, perfect. And Zarina, about why they should apply, the benefits of application and going through the process.
There are just so many reasons. And one of the biggest reasons for us was you have unlimited access to expertise that you wouldn't get otherwise. And then getting advice from like top industry experts for free is unbelievably good for a startup and early stage, especially. Then you have exposure to your potential customers, your partners, your regulators. You kind of get everything you need to know in one space. You also go through a very thorough due diligence process by the industry experts that validate your technology. So at the end, that becomes your, like your credibility card. Even if you start raising investments afterwards, there's so many benefits. I can't advise and advocate for it enough. So yeah.
Beautiful answer. Not even rehearsed, genuinely.
I just want to echo this point because actually we were able to finish our seed round because of GCCA. Just going to put this out. Yeah.
Isn't that important? Tom, I can see you're looking for a question. No.
If I was wondering if you want to ask the same question to the colleagues in the room.
Sure, please. Just wait for a second. The microphone is on its way. In fact, it's coming with me.
On our end, so I can also only vouch for the program. On our end, what was also important, I think, was to set up the program, how would it work. So we decided to go for multiple phases. First, to make sure that the consortium find the value compelling, and then a second phase for the project where we build something together. So that was also how we set up the application for last year's program.
Beautiful and wise.
Good for Laura. She's second, so she has time to think a little bit.
Yeah, we're still quite early stages. But I feel that the program already pushed us to make our product better, for example, and also gave us exposure to potential off-takers and customers. And it's been really, really, really good for us up to now, but looking forward to the next stages as well.
Amazing, thanks so much. So there's the rallying call. If you're a startup, do please join us and apply. So we're reaching the close of this.
One remark from my side. I mean, it's because we are always constantly talking about the 15 consortium that we have, but on top of that, we only do consortium when we have more than 3 GCCA members interested. But more startups are actually cooperating beyond the consortium. If 1 or 2 of the members are interested, then you go on a separate path, and that's also equally interesting, even if more limited with the members. But for competition purpose, we cannot go beyond 3 members in every consortium. But so really, don't hesitate to apply. It's a lot of of startup. We've brought through 300 startups all over since the beginning, and that's a lot of innovation that could actually be put in movement. And as Miles once said it, he said, you guys have the ability to pick the winners, right? So thank you for these words.
Indeed. So a round of applause for the Open Challenge launching. A round of applause for our panel on innovation, technology, and financing. A round of applause for all our speakers that have joined us today. A round of applause for the audience that got here in a heat wave in London. Thank you very much. And for those joining online. But more than that, I think we've really made progress in terms of some of the really critical both opportunities, challenges that we have in terms of both policy and technology and financing. And we wanted to start this sort of discussion at the very start of London Climate Week, and there's a whole heap of events that we're going to be at. So it's the beginnings of a conversation that we're going to have over the course of the next few days. But thanks again so much for joining. Do please follow us online. You can find all our social media and all our handles and website by using the QR. I leave the final words then to Thomas to close the event. Thank you, Thomas.
I wanted to have a couple of words on innovation, the next rendezvous we have with innovation. We will certainly do something quite interesting at COP on the grid zone. I mean, we have our Turkish partners there that are organizing a very interesting space on the grid zone. On that will be the moment. I mean, we've been talking about that for some time to actually show off, the innovation, the startups, etc. at COP. So, guys, I mean, if your next rendezvous in Turkey. And the next one is, of course, in Dubai, where we will have our next year's annual event, where we'll make the demo day of this 2025 round on selections. And there we'll also showcase our startups on our colleagues there. So that's really a great pleasure. I mean, I will extend the thanks, if I have the closing word. Thank you very much for being here, for taking the time for us. As you said, I mean, this is a very, very busy week.
Partners.
Yeah, okay, that's the finger pointing, okay. I want to thank the partner indeed, the Breakthrough Agenda, I mean our co-chair, the Canadian government and the Emirate governments. I mean, it's really a pleasure to work with you guys. And we are looking forward. I mean, again, Dubai will be with Emirates, so we hope you will be there with us. Concrete Transition Capital, thank you for being here, lead it as well. And of course, the Mission Possible partnership, the ITA. I mean, there are events with MPP on ITA in the course of the week, so I hope you have the opportunity to attend to these events as they come. Thank you very much, Guy, and that was a real pleasure.
Indeed, we've had more closes than Lord of the Rings, but that's it now. So thanks all.